Call this work session to order. The first item on our agenda is a legislative session recap, and joining us today is Senator Andrew Serafini and Delegate Brett Wilson. We'll welcome them to the table and thank them for putting together this presentation for us today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
I'm going to turn it over to you.
I think we requested this meeting, so. And I had a rough agenda, and I think they gave you some stuff in the packet, but really, Delegate Wilson is your resident, I'm your resident senator, but I thought maybe are you okay if you start?
That's fine.
Yeah, because I start other times and make a mess, and then you got to clean up my mess, so let's start with the
I
good
don't know
stuff.
about that too much. Sure, we did want to meet with you, I guess formally, once after the session, just of course to make sure everyone knows the lines of communication are open. Of course, I'm available, and I know Andy's available at any time for phone calls, emails, and meetings, so we can really coordinate a good agenda coming up to the next legislative session. Obviously, there's important things that did get passed this past term, but also some very important things, I think, for Hagerstown that did not get passed. And we'd like to coordinate those with you as best we can so we can make the best presentation possible. One thing that the Senator and I talked about presenting was certainly the CRIZ bill, which is something that I really believe in, especially for a town like Hagerstown. I've talked to Councilman Brubaker about it. Of course, the mayor's been involved with that. And it's a bill, an economic development bill that I think helps towns like Hagerstown perhaps better than a lot of other places in the state because of some of our needs and some of our properties that are run down and just underused right now, but could be used for great benefit to develop a real economic base for our city. And I know, talking with the mayor multiple times since the session began in January, a couple things we can do to modify the bill to make it even better and stronger for Hagerstown, particularly defining what types of areas can utilize the CRIZ, how we can better designate a portion of the money to go back to public use. I think there's some things we can work on to make next year's proposed bill even better than this year so that it does meet the needs of the city. Some of the successes, of course, we had the festival license bill, which really Senator Serafini and the Community Coalition's lobbyists had just an incredible amount of effort put into that was successful. So that downtown we can now, when we have festivals that blocks off streets, can allow patrons to walk in and out of private establishments as well as the street. And one of the public benefits of that, of course, is it helps to decrease. I believe will help decrease imbibing too much in alcohol, because it means that you don't have to finish a drink in order to go into an establishment. I think any law that requires people to actually kill off that last bit of drink before going into someplace else to then order another drink, it sends the wrong message and gives the wrong policy. We want people to be able to walk around freely at a festival, enjoying their own pace and not having to push them. So that was, I think, a good success. It'll certainly help the wind downs once it goes through, and any other festivals that we come up with. I think one thing I'll just throw out there at this point, this is looking forward to next session now that it's not an election year. We have more time. I think we'd all like to set a good schedule that we can work with so that we get legislative ideas together in an early stage. We work through them to try and get draft bills either from legislative services or even locally to draft the bills, so that we are ahead of the game instead of filing things during the session. We want to have them pre-drafted so we can file them at any time. I know with the liquor bills this year, of course, it's just a matter of election year. You get a little bit behind the eight ball. So going into this year, we'd really like to try and work with you ahead of time to have bills drafted and ready to be put in as soon as we get there in January. Other than that, I certainly offer myself to any questions, any contacts at any time. I think Senator's going to give some updates on perhaps a wider variety of some of the bills that did go through also.
I don't know if you all want to ask him or let me go, and then you can ask him then.
Go ahead.
That's fine. Okay. So once again, thank you all. You all have met with us in the past. We had, I hope, the meeting with Chairman McIntosh, was interesting. She was just Environmental Matters Chair at that point. She's now over Appropriations. That's a major issue. And her influence now, and Senator Munson can, reflect on that. I think she looks very favorable on our area. She likes this area. She's been very kind, and, you know, the parallels up until recently of Baltimore, of a declining tax base, and what do you do to do that? They were having great success. They really were. In fact, it was funny, their school funding got hurt because their property values were starting to rise. And it was quite a dilemma, you know, that part of the reason their education funding wasn't as much is because they were doing better. It's kind of a, you know, Dr. Wilcox calls it a race to the bottom. You know, the poorer you look, the more money you get. And so I think she's still someone that's a good advocate for us. And I thank you that you welcomed her and appreciated who she is. So a very influential person in the area. I think the meeting with Dr. Wilcox, I think the meeting with Mr. Ross, those are things that we said going forward. Once again, USMH and some of the things that are happening with nurse practitioner and future opportunities are going to really be helpful. So, you know, I appreciate your time. Certainly before I was just a local person interested. Now as the senator, this is a responsibility. This is part of our jurisdiction. So I'm here to help you. I'm here to bring ideas to you. You should know, I think this year was a year of trying to do things with the budget. That's fine. I think next year is the year to look at taxes and see what they can be done. Now, I think MML and MACO are both saying maybe what we ought to do is let the locals decide how to handle local type taxes, okay? So as far as state tax breaks, we're still gonna have to go back and ask them. So NISCRIZ and some of that, but if it's a local, as long as it's within the local thing, what you do with your properties to incent and do stuff, that's fine. But you know, you got NISCRIZ out there, RISE is still out there because of your education things that we can have some credits across this. Whatever you want to do, whatever you say you want to make available to yourselves, please let us know as we hear things that we think might apply. I know, you know, the Board of Ed is with the county commissioners as we speak, I believe. I know that's an issue you are. I will tell you that that's an across the state issue, okay? Maintenance of effort, the forced contribution of school funding has created this tension between county governments and boards of education. How we do things creatively, some of you know Senator Jim Rosapep. He was up here. He loves Barbara Ingram. He loves the idea of redeveloping downtown space for educational opportunities. I think that's another one that Chairman McIntosh is going to embrace in Baltimore. I think we can be the model. I think what you all are trying to do, and from what I've read only, I think you guys have been very forward thinking with that. I think that hub concept could be really powerful. It's different, and I think it could be a model for where we go. There is support downstate for that. We may end up being a model. It may be kind of Anne Arundel and Washington County being the models to do some of those alternative type programs. But I think it is definitely the future of education is going to change. We can't build schools the way we have for the last 100 years, and we've got to look at the educational opportunity. So I think you guys are on the lead for that, and I think the prospects of what can come out of there. We did get the Dolman money, which was nice. It's a start. It's not where we're not done yet, and we need to figure out where that's going to be. I think Delegate Wilson and I are going to be going to one of their board meetings here soon to talk about that. The Maryland Theater bond bill was in a year where they cut back on those initiatives. I think it was great efforts for, once again, Delegate Wilson did a great job. Let me say this to you. I know there was some controversy, I don't want to say controversy, conversation about a lobbyist, okay, and the funding of lobbyists. And I know you guys are really doing a lot with a little these days. We don't get that festival without the help of the Manus Cannon Group, and nothing against previous, but that bill had to be completely rewritten. It needed to be worked over. We were late. We had a lot of, you know, if there's any mess with any kind of bill, it's just easy for them to say, come back next year. And I got to say, John Favazza specifically did a lot of work for that bill. And we were told early on, you know, I don't think that's going to happen. And he really stuck with it and pressed. So I would tell you, as you're deliberating and thinking, I'd like to say as elected officials, we don't need help of lobbyists. Just too much is going on when you're trying to take care of your own business. And I have to tell you specifically.
And you've only got 90 days.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and new. You know, there was 90 new people in new seats this year. So the confusion and the lateness, I think this is what Delegate Wilson is saying too. we too are saying, we want to line up, if there's something you guys would like that we can help you and make a request, we want, if it's legislation, we want to have that formed as best we can by December. Now, stuff can happen where you may need to come late, but if it's something you want, we want to line that up and pre-file it, because they really, if you were late this year, and, you know, in the past, you could go and, you know, have a conversation, it was really hard this year. The other side of his budgeting request, if there's things that you all want or need, we need to start lining those up now. We're talking to Secretary Brinkley, who's the now Secretary of Department of Budget and Management, of coming to Hagerstown here, maybe within a month. That's just new. Secretary Ron, Department of Transportation, if you haven't already, we'll get in notification he's coming to Hagerstown. Okay, I was just telling Mr. Tissue, we're going to try to drive him around and show him what we need for roads and highway user revenues. 81 professional court will be a conversation we'll have with them as well. So we will make sure you're invited to that, so you can have a chance to, he's coming here. So that's the next thing we're trying to do, is bring the secretaries here. Okay, Secretary Gill, DBED, we're lining him up. Secretary Schultz of Dollar is going to come. We're going to try to get MDP. Secretary Mahatra was up at Department of Human Resources. Their idea of welfare to work, welfare to entrepreneurship, of job training and stuff, a lot of things that they want to do. They're willing, you know, our Department of Social Services is doing a great job. They're going to test some pilot things here to really help change the context of this. And I know, you know, Councilman Alshire, I think, has spoken well about the challenges that are here downtown, and I think part of that job training is going to be a big issue. And we're talking about doing works with, you know, maybe Volvo and those guys to get some job training things so we can work with people along those lines. So, you know, there were other bills that were there. I think he is right. All that said, now, you know, whether today or whatever you need, that's what we are here for, to say, okay, what can happen, what can't happen, where can we go, who should we talk to? As those secretaries are making their rounds through here, what are some of the things that could help you all as far as that goes as well?
Could you, if I could ask a couple questions first, and I'll turn it over to my colleague. Can you explain more about the outcome of the Dolman bill? I was a little confused by the description on the memo, but can you just brief us on that real quick?
Sure. The Dolan bill, which was the same one that had been filed last year, or I mean 2 years ago, it was an authorizing bill to allow a certain commission that currently funds one museum, that being the Banneker Douglas, and then otherwise just having monies for capital projects, to use any additional monies they have for operations in museums like the Dolman. It wasn't specific, but it was specific to how they can use excess monies. What the Senator is able to do was also work through, from the Senate side in the budget, at least some seed money to get something going. The purpose of which was Chairman Hammond on the House side liked the bill. He supports the idea. He wanted to see some appropriation, though, attached to it, just so there's actually something there to kind of get it moving. The Senator is able to get that on the Senate side. I would not have been able to get that additional appropriation on the House side, so that's how it came through. So the law now that created the Commission on Preservation of African American History and Culture can now also fund additional operations besides just the Banneker Douglas. So that is something, it's now an available revenue source when they have revenue, but it's not a mandatory funding source. So we still have to find the monies, hopefully private donations particularly, but we still have to find the monies that could actually then be used to operate the museum.
Okay. And I guess the other question I had was in relation to, let me mention the CRIS. I do think that that's a great idea. I think Hagerstown will be a good pilot or model for what could happen in the state. And just for folks who may not be familiar with it, it's using any state tax revenue that would be generated by a new development, new businesses coming into the state of Maryland, to allow those taxes or revenue that would otherwise go to the state goes right back into the financing of the project. And I think it's a win-win for everybody all around. And, just on a weekend trip to Lancaster, you can go in there downtown and you see, another CRIZ project, advertised in the window. So the reason I think it would help Hagerstown is because of our competitive disadvantage, if you will, compared to Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And it gives us something to offer that would help potentially keep job creators to move into Hagerstown instead of choosing Pennsylvania or West Virginia. And also, given the other kinds of things that we're trying to do with downtown, make it the place to be. So I think anything we do, I know Senator Rosapep was really interested in that idea. He's a finance kind of guy, so it seems like he might be a good person to have on our side for that. And it would be great, again, the state's not going to lose anything because these would be businesses new to the state of Maryland, but it certainly would help the local economy, which eventually, once those incentives wear out, so to speak, the state would be benefiting a lot, so.
And one thing we did to amend the original drafting of it, to take it from 30 years down to 20 years before the benefits run out, making it more advantageous for the state and hopefully getting a little better traction when we actually go to push it again this year.
And I think it's key to understand, we've been through difficult economic times, obviously, that's nothing new. But what happens in Annapolis is if you have any kind of tax credit, they look at the short-term loss, they don't look at the dynamic, and that's fair. So what happens to a good idea is if the fiscal note comes in and says the state's gonna lose, I think this year the number was like $50,000, right? If it even said short-term you might lose 50,000, it was just not gonna be considered. This was year to fix the budget.
Right.
So any kind of credits or tax incentives just didn't,
Even though
governors-
technically the state wouldn't be losing that money,
Well,
they just couldn't count on it for that
It's
next
explaining
year,
that
right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
That dynamic scoring, which we're really pressing, which is interesting because our congressman has now talked about the federal government doing dynamic because they never look at what will be the positive. So
Right.
even though you're saying you're not getting this,
Right.
they're saying, but if we left things as it was and they did new come here, we would. That we can't, we fight
It's not
those
part of
fiscal
the
notes, right,
equation,
yeah.
right.
When they agree with us, we love them. When they disagree, we tell
There's
how
a big
bad they
problem.
are, right? And that one, so the merits of the bill, once a fiscal note had more than $50,000, you can imagine a $40 billion budget,
Sure.
a $50,000 cost. That was the line, the Mendoza line that said, come back next year kind of thing.
And the other thing I know is a particular topic of interest for many council members is, is there any exploration or investigation into this idea that folks are placed in treatment programs here in Hagerstown because somehow you can get the more money per bed for people coming out of Baltimore than in the local area? And is there anything we can do that you can think of that we can address that issue?
Yeah, and part of the problem with that is it depends when other jurisdictions get monies for their drug treatment program, especially through their courts. As you know, Baltimore City, their drug court had gotten monies from the state that they used to get into a contract with the Wells House. This is over a number of years. And, I think it was actually the former governor's wife was involved in that drug court process and sending many, many people up here. Unfortunately, one of which who stayed after the program is still one of our unsolved murders in the area. But that money had run out. So the question is when other monies become available that they can do that. Now, I have conversation with Mr. Mooneyham at the Wells House on a regular basis, have and asked him for a breakdown of where his folks are coming from right now, majority. I think that is information you can give out without violating HIPAA. Obviously, as we found out a few years ago, they are protected under the HIPAA laws too, so you have to be careful what information you ask for and what information you don't. But it is something we can certainly find out and try to determine where the people are coming from, whether they had moved here and then gone into treatment, or whether they're sent directly from another jurisdiction. Some fine lines, but they do make a difference as far as trying to affect funding for it.
Right.
As far as actual funding through DHMH for various programs, I have not looked into whether we can in any way try to attach any riders, or whether the new administration, new leadership would take a more favorable look at trying to have folks treated to the extent available in their locality or as close to home as possible. Some rule in the bureaucratic process that would keep them from being sent halfway across the state, especially as we know, because once someone comes here, they often stay here, and that's been the real problem.
You know, once again, I've heard you all, and I think it's well said. I mean, yeah, we represent the county, but this city is a key component. And we've got to come to you guys, or you come to us and say, what can we do? I think your core is the key. These people all need services, that's fine. We want preference to locals first. The problem is we do such a good job, you know. The DSS has this reputation of we have great outcomes or better. The local management board does a great job. We have, you know, good people there. But we've got to help you create an attractive, economic, viable, you know, that's, you know, once again, Baltimore City, you know, they commented that all the yuppies from Montgomery County were moving into Baltimore City because they want urban life. Young kids want social. They want the opportunity to walk someplace to a blues fest or, you know, whatever it is. And so the opportunity of reurbanization is huge. It's moving across the country. You guys have got to be able to clear a path somehow. We got to serve those people, but can we, how do we migrate that? How do we do that? Both the services and some of the subsidized and even the non-governmental subsidized. Once again, Councilmember Alshire has said that quite well. That's part of the other problem is the other landlords that are here at that level. We're not saying send you to, you know.
Right.
We'll send you back to wherever. No,
We just need a better balance, a better
you.
economic
Yes.
balance here.
Right.
And it's not about displacing poor people by
That's
any means.
exactly
But
right.
as we're about to hear in the report on the impediments to fair housing in Hagerstown, that
Right.
we have some real demographic challenges. I mean,
Sure.
I think 50%, what was it, of the people who rent
Right.
are cost overburdened by
Right.
just their cost for housing.
Sure.
So trying to increase home ownership and
Right.
increase the population of folks with disposable income is, I mean, we've been talking about it since I was in high school, and that's been 20 years. It's just finding that way is
Right.
the key.
And if you look at the rents just in Hagerstown, I know that the study was looking more broadly at Washington County generally, which if you use a Washington County number, it's going to bump that mean number up over what Hagerstown offers for single and two-bedroom apartments. To then find out that so many people are below the Mendoza line, so to speak, economically, even with the lower rents in Hagerstown, is certainly troubling because it shows that we're going the wrong way economically. One thing I want to mention also about the social services aspect and the treatment aspect, where folks are coming from, a parallel to that, as we all know, and it's the thing we always talk about, is the prisons and the number of people that, once released from prisons, take up homestead in Hagerstown, regardless of where they may have been originally from, because they've made connections here, both in prison, also through visitation during their stay. The Justice Reinvestment Council is one bill that was passed, which does not have any price tag associated with it, but it's looking, one of the key sections looking at is completely, hopefully revamping how the Division of Correction works to prepare inmates for when they're departing, making a better connection with whatever the original home jurisdiction was for that person, so that they're more likely to stay there and less likely to reoffend. I know one little pilot program that had been effective is actually run by our mediation office here, mediating between soon-to-be released inmates and their family plan or their home plan for when they're released. That alone has dropped recidivism down 13%. So, and that was only with a $150,000 grant program. So with the Reinvestment Council, it will touch base with a lot of the issues for whether they were addicted persons or just persons who had turned to criminal life, trying to strengthen their bonds to their home jurisdiction and their home families. Hopefully, two things. One, it stopped them from bouncing back up to Hagerstown because they know some people who are the wrong people to hang with or whatever. And secondly, hopefully it'll help them to lower their likelihood of recidivism. So there's some other things going on that should help Hagerstown also.
And I just wanted to thank the senator for his support for the alternative financing for the hub. I hope we find a way to make that project happen. I know the Board of Ed is asking the county commissioners for that money probably as we speak. I don't know what the outcome of that will be. The council certainly supports the project in concept, and I believe are willing to even, find a way to make the finances, our contribution work. And we too would like to see it tie into the Maryland Theater eventually and be a cultural arts and education hub. So I think that in addition to providing educational opportunity for so many young people from across the county, not just in Hagerstown, in addition to what it could do for just increasing foot traffic and the presence of those educators and teachers and students and parents in downtown, I think all of that would be beneficial. So I appreciate any work being done on that end. Lastly, I just wanted to bring up the hotel motel tax, because I like to bring that up from time to time, but I'm still not giving up on keeping baseball here in Hagerstown. I know that there are ongoing efforts. The key is having a team that wants to be here. I mean, ultimately, that's the bottom line. But I think as we look at potential ways forward on that, if we end up having a team that still needs a place to play and or a different ownership that's willing to be a better partner in coming to the table, then I think that hotel motel tax should be on the table as a major driver for financing bricks and mortar projects, not just a stadium, but the idea of an indoor sports facility or anything that can drive this tourism and sports economy, I think is a good thing too. So just
And
wanted
that's
to throw
probably a
that out.
discussion to have during the summer with, of course, Mr. Spedden from CVB, with representative county commissioners, and of course yourselves and delegation members to see where we are and where we can go forward so that money is best used, not just to spread out across the county, but used for projects that are going to increase trade in the county.
Right.
Even if, one jurisdiction gets more this year because it's a larger project that's going to have more bang for the buck, we need to be able to, set up the system so it can be done that way.
Or even if it's a proportional way of, if there's X amount of Hagerstown hotels, looking at, other ways of dividing revenue, or even increasing the tax. I mean, that's the one tax that's other people's money. So I know nobody likes increasing taxes, but that's sort of low-hanging fruit, and I think comparatively, it's relatively low. I think if you look at surrounding jurisdictions, the tax might be up to 10 cents. But anyway, it's just one of the things I think that could be potentially beneficial when we're looking at some kind of plan to move forward with keeping a team here in Hagerstown. So those are my comments. Mr. Brubaker.
Yes. And we do have 75% of the municipal population, so it is fair to help us out with it.
I agree.
My question, and first of all, I want to do a thank you for the highway user revenues. The governor proposed a supplemental. I thanked him, and I thank you all for your support of that, and had a few battles to keep it intact during the session, and that really helps us. What doesn't help us, as you know, and you've heard this before, is not having a formula-driven amount that's a fair amount that we can count on, because even with that supplemental, we're only about half of where we were before the drastic reductions. This is not a subsidy. This is something, because localities can't do a gas tax, nor should they. It's to share maintaining roads. Hagerstown does a very good job of it. Rodney's back there. He's got an objective system for measuring the streets. The council has kept that money in by hook or by crook most years, but we still run behind, and as you know, we cut $1 million from the budget this year, but we're still facing a difficult issue next year. But the main thing is to be able to plan, and I'd just like to hear your comments on whether you think that can be restored to where it was. When I've talked to people privately, I said we need a formula-driven thing that's guaranteed, that has an inflation amount in, and then therefore everybody can, figure on what's coming to them.
And you're right. I mean, that's one of the few
And
areas.
it's a relatively small amount.
Well, it's
compared
one
to
of the
others.
few areas that is not formula-driven. As you know, the discretionary budget is largely not discretionary, especially the majority party this year did add additional formulaic strangleholds on money for education that are likely going through. And I think part of the problem in getting some type of formula-driven funding for the highway user fees, which, you know, I'm a city resident, I pay those fees, I pay gas tax, all city residents are paying the gas tax, they're using the roads, but they're not getting any money back to help with the local roads that the state doesn't take care of. But it seems like, at least in the past, those monies have been so, I don't know, used so willy-nilly to fund other projects of higher value to the groups in charge that they've been very reluctant to attach a formula to them that would take that money out of their hands. I don't know if the will is there right now to get a formula through or not. I know we both support getting money back to highway user fees to the number it historically was, so it's a matter of seeing if we can get any movement on that going forward.
I mean, you know, the red or purple certainly plays, you know, and has been said, even if they don't do one of those projects, there's already enough requests to all the, you know, whatever is $1 billion, you know, if they don't do red, let's just say, that money's already clamoring for, people are anticipating. You know, Secretary Ron is a road builder, he's not a mass transit guy. So I think that you line and you continue to be very vocal. I think we talked at the MML meeting that, you know, when they tried to pull some money out of even the little bit that had been allocated, MML, once again, hate to put a lobbyist out there, but Candace Donahoe, I've never seen her that upset in all of my years down there. And we were able to articulate the problem with that and preserve that. So I think we're committed to that. I mean, that's one that you hear more and more. Highway user revenues definitely one. I mean, program open space is getting rated quite a bit. You know, ag preservation is getting rated quite a bit. But the one that people are clamoring for most is highway user revenue. Because when you don't spend $1 today, it doesn't mean you can just spend $1 next year with roads maintenance. That's the one thing that's become really clear. And you know, our bridges and roads are not rated real well right now. And so that even becomes public safety. So you're going to say it every time we see you. I appreciate that. You're going to say it every time you're down the road. And I will tell you, I think that's, hey, you got to shout. And you know, I think the municipalities have done a good job. So we're committed to restore that back. We think it should be back because that was a formula that worked for years and years, no problem, right? No one ever questioned it was and then you could plan, as you said. So I think the governor is of a mind to do that. He gets it, but it's, once again, how quick and how fast can we get it in?
Yeah, he told us he was of a mind, but then Brinkley and Rom are going, oh, well, you know, and I understand what
Well, I
they're.
mean, you know, politically, what's he going to do? Because
Yeah.
red and purple is a large part of the population. We always talk about that. The rurals can all lock arms and talk, but we're still much smaller than them. But I think even that, even if you see red not done to its full extent, but a smaller, then that frees up money. And I would hope that the priority before these other projects come would be to restore highway user revenue first. Maybe a little bit of good news, we're not sure on revenues, maybe, we're hearing. That might really help out a lot of this too. So if that would come to fruition, which we hope it will, then same thing. You want that to be, I gotta do this so those guys will. You know, I knew a lady that invested with a stockbroker one time, and I said, well, why did you do that? She said, he called me every day for 6 months. I finally asked him, if I give you money, will you stop calling? So it wasn't me.
Is that autobiography?
No, it was not me. It was not me. But you know, that's the, they're gonna respond to that. I think that's worthwhile to do. Anyhow.
And I will say, we'll take you up on that offer. We can schedule a work session to come up with some legislative agendas.
Yeah.
And maybe if it pleases the council, we can either invite you back to a work session, or we can have a couple representatives from the council we can meet and go over some of that stuff and get that ready to go before the fall.
Yeah, at this point, the nice thing is we can brainstorm, come up with, just throw, you know, ideas out, start working them through, see if they're pragmatic or not, see if they really would have the benefits that initially are thought, and then we can work them into a really nice legislative package, hopefully by by January.
But definitely, that's the, you know, Secretary Ron being here next month, we want to get on their CIP for the transportation project. So, 81 and that are going to be things we're going to press now.
Well, you can almost bet that on any day that he comes up, there's probably going to be an accident on 81.
Yeah.
You can just take him out there and show him how important that
Yeah.
work is to
Yeah.
improving safety and maneuverability.
And I think that's the issue on both. The professional court push is that, the ambulance traffic to Morgansville and that area is delayed by 2 or 3 minutes. We can talk about relieving traffic on state highways, but to me, and we can talk about economic development. Those are all nice things, but really, to me, it's the public safety issue, and it's clearly, that we have 40% truck traffic. I mean, Marty can tell you that better than anybody. That's a problem. And so he did say, he said, I'm very aware, same thing. He said, I've heard this multiple times about the problems with 81. I've heard it's the deadliest per mile stretch in the state. And we've got to, once again, if any of us were going to wager of Pennsylvania, Maryland, or West Virginia, who would be the first to get to 6 lanes, I would have lost that bet that West Virginia is ahead of us. And we're hearing now that the cost for the bridge is coming in below what they thought. We've been told that, some of these other expenses that were pretty inflated maybe are just that. So if it can be done a little more economically,
Even better.
That's going to be huge for us.
Okay. Thanks very much. Does anyone else have questions or comments?
I have a couple of comments, and you addressed a little bit of it. On we'll call it the sheltering facilities. First, I'm going to give you the same thing that I gave the Herald last week, which is a subsidized housing comparison that we received, which will indicate how drastically different the city of Hagerstown's subsidized housing, which is a very broad definition, by the way, compared to Annapolis and Cumberland and Frederick. I mean, our numbers combined, or our numbers themselves make up a number of jurisdictions combined, Frederick and Cumberland, Annapolis, and some other areas. So I think you'll find that interesting. The other thing I want to give you is a map that staff also gave us that shows that there's more than 50 of these types of service facilities located in downtown.
I think that's one of the first things I gave to Delegate Wilson after he took office.
And that's just the locations that we're familiar with, not the transition facilities that have no regulatory oversight outside of their activities. I'm sure you guys read about the issue of non-payment of utility service and the issue with the Dagmar. I mean, everybody was on those emails. There's no secret. But it's clearly no secret either that the state and federal directives appear to be to place individuals in private housing to get away from that public cost. I understand that's the directive, but the risk that comes along with that is the gamble that those private owners are going to pay the bills, and local jurisdictions just simply can't eat that. We have at times experienced about 20% of our utility-based customer not paying, and I believe Antietam Cable would share a similar figure. And our staff work diligently to keep that figure as low as possible. But, those state and federal protections from folks that have no interest in paying bills during the cold weather months drive that number up, and it's a seesaw. The state gives entities like CAC money, and individuals come back and from CAC and pay the bill in April, and it's a cycle. I mean, that's the way it works. But I found it interesting in one of the minutes when the Dagmar issue occurred, and I'll just read it to you. The director of CAC wanted everyone at that meeting to keep in mind that there would need to be mental health providers on hand when notifying the residents, because they had about 50 of them, of any change in their status. Some residents have been placed at the Dagmar for 14 years, and due to the problem, stability could trigger. They would not notify the clients that the event was occurring, and the clients would not do well in a shelter-type facility. Clearly, when I hear those types of figures, when I hear that one methadone clinic in town serves 2,000 individuals, and the other one outside of town serves 5,000 individuals. We're clearly not home growing 7,000 individuals that have need of these services. I also found it interesting when I hear the figures last week the Herald Mail put out about the number of individuals taken into the Wells House from the Baltimore area. And I'm told that at sheltering facilities like that, that those facility directors take over their food stamp vouchers and operate that for them. And that some agencies working on behalf of some of those individuals at times are unable to access the inside of those facilities to ensure the livability conditions of those individuals. You know, and I said this, and we're going to have a conversation about it over the next month, is, you know, we have a rental registration program. Somebody living at the Dagmar for 14 years clearly falls within the spirit of a program like the rental registration program, when you have some average folks that don't live in some apartments for more than 7 months in our core. And the spirit of that is to protect the livability conditions of every renter, in every facility within this community, and should be applied equally to those facilities that house the most vulnerable of our citizens. And so that's, I think, at least my position on that issue.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
So, what do we do? You know what
Well,
I'm saying? I mean,
well,
because can
yeah.
we say residency or percentages? Because I think that would
No,
be.
but I think the difficulty is when folks think of the Hagerstown Housing Authority, the Community Action Council. I think a lot of folks view these entities to be under the authority of Hagerstown because it's called the Hagerstown Housing Authority, or under the authority of Washington County because it's called the Washington County Community Action Council, or that Washington County Department of Social Services is the headquarters for distribution of these services, when that's clearly just not the case. So many of these entities, so many of their operational capacities are clearly authorized and controlled through those state legislative processes. They're not controlled through the authority of the city of Hagerstown or Washington County. Those, I think, are the types of conversations, like when you brought up Delegate McIntosh, that indicated that a lot of the local things occurring within their housing complexities were clearly items of a state nature and not a local nature,
Okay.
and we cannot combat them
So if we can
locally.
bring DHMH and DHR back in here and highlight this and say, you know, we're not asking you to give us the money to maintain this, we're asking you to help us, because this is just a burden we can't bear, and to give us a say-so, right? That's the other problem, that you have no control over where there's placed and things like that. So I think, right, so I think that would be we do have a new secretary, DHMH. He is going to be one of the visitors to come up. Mr. Mahaltra has said he'll come back up. We had the conversation with Dave Engel not too long ago and brought these same issues. It's not just that we do it better and less expensive, it's just that this is, no community can sustain this.
And I'd be interested to see what level of state activity exists in those with the responsibility of going into these places
Right, some accountability.
and monitoring them
Right.
on some regular basis.
Wow.
How often do you really get in there? You know, how often are folks from the state level really going in to make sure that those livability conditions are appropriate, that the activity
For
provisions.
the ones that receive state
And
funds.
Right. Well, and for the ones under state authority. I mean, I just find
HHR
it,
also is largely federal.
I find it completely odd that the Department of Social Services, which is sort of a local entity of a state authorization, places individuals in a private place, such as the Dagmar, and then when the private utility payer doesn't pay the bill, there is no Plan B for relocation of those 12 individuals that doesn't take more than 90 days to effectuate. Right now, the Plan B for this community is the Dagmar, and if that's the reality, then we all have a problem. And so that's, you know, that I think, you know, when Dave Engel called and said, I've got to call in people from across the state, and it's going to take us 2 weeks to even start to think about this.
But the crucial outcome of that whole ordeal is that now these stakeholders are aware of what's going on. They are aware of the issues and the concerns, especially of the council. And really, I mean, it comes down to the question of, is this the best we can do for supportive and transitional housing in our community? And I hope the answer will be no, but then that, I mean, brings us back to the drawing board in terms of answering your question. Okay, so what do we do about it? And the big answer comes along with the recommendations we're about to hear in terms of the deconcentration of poverty and looking at the existing housing stock and, you know, really trying to lift up the members of our community, and to create a better mix of socioeconomic.
And if the current result is that we're continuing to encourage the expansion of entities, the creation of entities to provide this service for additional individuals through state-directed funding resources and state-directed regulatory processes, and the only thing that's being accomplished is taking in people, then the caseworkers will tell you in some of these entities, they don't have time to actually help anybody because all they're doing is taking in people. And you know, and I asked the question of some of them over the last several months, you know, where is HQ? You know what I mean? If I'm a person that needs the resource, where is HQ? And the amount of places that a person can get bounced around within the community before finding, you know, which resource is practical and viable for them, you know, is sort of a give-up process, you know, from the outset.
Go ahead, you go first.
Oh, no, unfortunately, my time is up as far as, I apologize, I have about 20 scouts coming over shortly to my house.
Oh,
I need
that's
to go
right. I
home and
forgot.
get
That's
ready for our leadership picnic, so
You
I
go.
need to run for that. Obviously, the conversation, I'm available, we can set up times, whether formally like this or informally in smaller groups, however the participants want to do it throughout the year. So just, I think you guys know where I work, it's just around the corner. I'll be available anytime. But thank you all very much.
I do appreciate
Nice
your
comment.
work on these and other issues related to the criminal justice reform, because there is a need, I think, to take a look at that and how that plays into the whole mix of what we're talking about. And
We get a lot of pressure from that
And for your
community,
support for
so-
mediation, I think is really great, because it is a pretty amazing program, and when you think about what you get out of it for what goes into it, I think it's really,
And hopefully with Hagerstown
Good
Housing
investment.
Authority changing leadership, perhaps we'll have a different tack in the future on how they process.
and there's
those
definitely
programs, too.
potential for partnerships there too.
Correct. Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.
And I apologize.
Good luck
that
with those Boy
it's backed
Scouts.
up.
I'm going to just respond, and I know you probably have other things, so I'll stay as long as you want, but I know you got other people waiting. So I find this interesting. I have struggled on the local management board. Very vivid for me, this is interesting, about 2 years ago, Mayor of Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, stood in front of a church and said, government can't do all this, we need coordination, okay? And we need your help. Faith-based community's got to step up. That's true. The problem is there's no coordination. And so you're right, where do I go? And we had people in our church pick up a lady off a dual highway just walking down the street. She said, I have problems, and I was told to go to Hagerstown. Now, you know, there's a couple problems with that. Number one, you know, she was from, I don't even think she was from Maryland, but she was just told, you got a problem, come here.
And that's
okay?
our problem.
And
Yeah.
That's our problem.
That's, you know, it boils down to, we feel like we're a dumping ground.
Sure.
We have relatively good support services.
Right.
And we have low rental and
Right.
real estate values.
Yeah.
That combination makes us a dumping ground.
Right.
And we're not saying we don't want to take care of our own.
Right.
We don't want to take care of the rest of the state.
Right.
In other areas, actually, as you just brought out.
Sure.
There's no.
We've heard the billboards in New York about it.
Yeah, there's no reason that on that sheet, that you look at, that Hagerstown being the sixth largest city should be the second largest provider.
Right.
Next to
Yeah.
Baltimore City.
So I think proportional is the issue. I think so, but the other one is that coordination. So interesting, my two brother-in-laws, one lives just outside of Chicago and one is in, near Fort Wayne, Indiana. And they do have that coordinated service. So they say, this is a state agency or a federal agency and it provides that service, but this is a gap. So we're gonna have the faith-based or the nonprofits come in and do it, but they all talk to each other, right? So when that person bounces from one to the other, they're in the system. I know Clarence Hurst and Harkin, those guys are working on that, that's fine. And I've been begging to get on the local management board, somebody from that, so they can talk. But I think that's the coordination. There's a lot of people going in different ways, and it's easy to work the system. And I think we gotta identify people early. We gotta say, how can we help? I mean, because, right, I haven't heard one person here say, let's just ship them all to Frederick or something else, right? Oh, Cumberland, that's fine. We're okay with that. Anyhow, we want to take care of our own, but it needs to be proportional. It needs to be coordinated. And you guys, if you're going to have to bear the brunt of it, need to have some control or at least input. So my suggestion will be, and I'll coordinate, that we got to have federal people here. We got to have the state agencies here. And the only thing I can promise you is I think I can get them here. And then we're going to lay out those maps. We're going to exactly say what you did. If we're sixth largest, we shouldn't be second largest in this. And somehow we've got to stem the tide of the people coming here. It's not that they're
victims of our own
Exactly.
success when it comes
Right.
to delivery of those services.
That's right.
And, you know, something that's in the report that we're about to hear is, it's about the continuum of care, and I know that's an actual name of an entity, and
Sure.
I don't know who is on that, or who gets on it, what their rules are, but that will be something of interest to me in terms of, like you say, bringing those people to the table
Right.
and having this conversation.
So I think, you know, the thing we're going to have to do is to say, here's our idea, right? We're going to have to come up with the solutions to say, it should be limited to a proportional. You know, we need to have some say in it. We need to know who's coming in and out. You know, once again, I'm not trying to be critical, but it was interesting for Secretary Malhotra to go in to DHR and say, what's your strategic plan? They said, we haven't done one for 23 years. Okay, when he asked them about how do you data collect, they're still running mainframes. Okay, and I'm not trying to be, it just is what it is. So the idea that they've got a long way to go to be able, he said, we should be able to track for you where child abuse may happen in a community, even to the door, with a proper collection of technology and stuff like that and data. We're not there, he knows it, he's committed to do that. I think he's open to this kind of conversation to say, that's great, but we're a dumping ground right now because we do a good job at low cost, as Councilman Brubaker said. So I think he's here, he understands. He heard from Dave Engel, you know, we do a great job, but that's part of our problem. And so we need to push that conversation to say, okay, how do we stem the tide? How do we make sure that we can continually help people, not just process them?
When
And
this
how can we
council-
not impact our community?
Did pass a resolution requesting the state basically give us that kind of input, but
Right.
because there's been a turnover, I was just telling Bruce, we'll get that resolution back out into
Great.
the hands of all the newly elected
Wow.
and appointed folks.
There's stuff happened that Van Mitchell from the DHMH is gonna be here, so when he's in here, definitely that we have this conversation. We'll get Secretary Malhotra back up here, and then the underlying agencies really is where that change, yeah. Thank you, I know you guys have a lot
I
of things to
appreciate
do.
the time,
Yep.
and thanks
Yep.
for coming and giving us.
No,
an
I'm
update.
Andy, that's fine, yeah. People call you Senator Delegate when they don't know what your first name is. They just say, you know, hey, Senator, I don't know who you are, but I think that's,
As I like to say, I've been called worse.
well, sometimes. Thank you all, have a good night.
Thanks. All right, our next item is an update on the Community Development Block Grant Planning documents. I'm gonna invite staff and our guests up. Jonathan Russell and Walt Haglund.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Introductions again, just to refresh everyone's memory. Jonathan Russell and Walt Haglund are our consultants for the Community Development Block Grant planning documents. They're out of Homestead, Pennsylvania. They've been working for the past few months on the required plans that we need to submit to the Department of Housing and Urban Development in order to continue to receive our annual grant from the Community Development Block Grant Program. The the planning documents they have been working on consist of the 5-year strategic consolidated plan, the annual action plan, and also the analysis of impediments to fair housing. Once again, to reiterate, these are all required documents that we must submit to HUD, and our target date for that is July 1st of this year. And we are planning to discuss the documents tonight with the mayor and council, and also potentially come back next week again if there are additional questions on these documents during the June 9th work session. One thing to note, that these plans moving forward in the future, they are amendable. So if we have something that we adopt in the plan in the short term or during the regular session in June, they are amendable over the 5-year period. We plan to also come back next week to discuss more in depth the CDBG budget and also the public service allocations. So once again, next week for June 9th, we're looking to have some further discussion on the consolidated plan, action plan, and analysis of impediments to fair housing if necessary, and also more in-depth discussion on the CDBG public services and the CDBG budget as a whole. With that said, Walt and Jonathan, we're going to let them walk us through some of the major points of the planning documents that they prepared, and then we'll take questions from the mayor and council.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening. We have been hired by the city to prepare, as Jonathan said, the 5-year consolidated plan and annual action plan and analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. Every 5 years, the city has to prepare a 5-year consolidated plan. HUD has changed the whole format, the whole direction of the 5-year plan. That's why, the staff asked us to come in and ask for proposals to prepare this. It's now all online. Everything is submitted electronically. There's no longer paper copies that are submitted to HUD. You will have paper copies yourself, but it's all electronic. It's also based on a lot of the information that HUD has through the what's known as the American Community Survey data, the 2010 census data, the HUD CHAS data, which is their comprehensive housing information, and also the continuum of care, which we heard about. And the mayor's comment was, who's on the continuum of care and all. That's important. It is part of the overall plan, and it's also, in discussions earlier today with Jonathan, it is really important to note that this plan has specific recommendations, has specific goals and objectives and priorities. And HUD is looking at 6 priority areas that the city of Hagerstown has to address. And for an agency to get federal funds, they have to come to the city of Hagerstown and say, our program, our activity, our proposed project fits into the city's 5-year consolidated plan. As Jonathan said, in the past, it's been pretty, general and hasn't been as specific. Now you have specific things. If somebody comes in and says, I want to build 100 units of low-income housing downtown Hagerstown, you can say no. It doesn't fit in with your plan anymore. HUD is saying to cities across the country, you have to deconcentrate. You don't want to concentrate all your low income, all your poverty in one area. It has to be deconcentrated. And so you can't afford to have any more high concentration. And the mayor mentioned this, earlier, in one area. It disincentivizes the citizens in that area. It affects the shopping in a commercial area. It has numerous effects that hurt a downtown business district. So with that, the 6 priority areas that HUD is looking at is housing, number 1, and they ask you to give a high and a low priority to these areas. Housing is a high priority. It's the housing rehabilitation, the home ownership, fair housing, etc. City of Hagerstown has gone over, tipped the scales where you have 60% rental, 40% home ownership. You need to get that balance back, the 50-50. And so the city staff is looking at trying to put more money into home ownership opportunities, allowing the elderly to age in place in their homes, providing support for their accessibility improvements, etc. you have a good housing stock, but it's a housing stock that needs some rehabilitation. You have a housing stock that's stable. However, you need to help that. You need to bring in more homeowners, more young people, and keep that home ownership element going higher. Another need is the homeless, and we talked about the continuum of care and housing support. You have to get involved in the continuum of care. The agencies that, through the Community Action Council, they are the lead agency in the continuum of care. They have to also, come to the table. You have to meet with them. You have to find out what the action is, what they're proposing, et cetera, and how they fit into the plan. We have met with them. They have input into the plan. They also have to do that continuum of care that they submit to HUD. They have to become more active, and they have to address the issues of the homeless. Other special needs housing, as I mentioned, social services, housing for the elderly, housing for the disabled, et cetera. Your community development, that's another high priority. Your public facilities, public services, your deconcentration of housing, your neighborhood revitalization, the accessibility and visitability of public buildings, public safety, code enforcement. Another high priority is economic development, employment opportunities, downtown revitalization, creation of entrepreneurship, et cetera. And then the last high priority is administration, planning, and management. Your administration of your program and your overall administration of the grant funds. I mentioned about the certificate of consistency. We had talked about the budget. Then you have over $1 million this year. You have roughly $234,000 estimated as program income. You have $641,600 from the federal government as your CDBG grant, and you have approximately $213,000 of unprogrammed funds from previous years. These are funds where project and activities have been completed as a surplus of funds that are not programmed, and so you have the opportunity this year to program them. So you have over $1 million, in funds to program. Each year, as you know, the federal government keeps cutting funds back and back. So you have to try to leverage these funds, try to get more money out of these funds. You also have to deal with your most pressing problems. The other part of this program was the AI, or analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. Analysis of impediments is basically looking at the city, looking at the opportunities that people have of all income levels for housing choice. Do they have fair housing choice? Can I go to an area throughout the city if I am economically able to and afford a house? If you look at the price of housing and the homeowners today, you have about 45% of your homeowners who really are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. That is a tough number to digest. Elderly can't afford a lot of the houses. That's why help has to be given to the elderly to try to add energy conservation measures, et cetera, to try to lower utility costs, to lower those houses. They can't afford to borrow money, et cetera. So in looking at the impediments to fair housing, we're not talking about subsidized housing, we're talking about affordable housing. And what are the protected classes? What are the issues that come up with affordable housing? Believe it or not, it's not racial anymore. The biggest issue with impediments to fair housing is for the disabled. Are reasonable accommodations made by landlords to couples? And by reasonable accommodations, what the federal law says is there a parking space, a handicap parking space for that individual? Can they get in and out of that building? If they need a service animal, are they allowed to have a service animal? Those are reasonable accommodations. We're not talking about major renovation of buildings. But they also say in the federal law that a landlord has to allow that tenant to make reasonable accommodations if they need to, such as widening a doorway or handicapped grab bars, et cetera, in their unit. So in looking at the the impediments to fair housing choice. We talked about fair housing education and outreach and awareness. To keep this alive and going, the city is doing this now, the agencies are doing this, but to make sure people understand. We did a survey of the residents, and it's surprising how many residents don't know where they would even file a complaint about fair housing if they were discriminated. Perfect example is a young couple that has children, and they look at a place and the landlord says, oh, we don't want any children. You can't do that. You know, it's against the Fair Housing Act. You know, those are the types of problems that come up. And you say, where do you go to file that complaint? And that's one of the things that has to be brought out and has to be explained to individuals. Plus the landlords. Do landlords really know what a reasonable accommodation is? That's the type of thing. Work with the local board of realtors, local management companies, et cetera. The quality of the rental housing and affordability. You know, you have your rental rehab program to continue that, and the rental, registration program. You have to enforce that. You know, you have to look at all of the, whether they're subsidized units or private units. You have to make sure that these are up to code standards. The need for affordable home ownership housing. Your housing rehab, your home ownership opportunities, things of that nature that I mentioned earlier. The need for accessible housing units, assistance to the elderly and reasonable accommodations. And lastly, the economic issues, new job opportunities, encourage entrepreneurship, et cetera. You know, we're talking about people being able to have jobs in the community. You know, unemployment in Washington County has dropped down. You know, the idea is to work with the county, work with the economic development agencies, work with your own economic development staff to try to get more opportunities, for economic development. I know the city has done a yeoman's job in your Main Street program and getting that off the ground and started. That's a really good start. The small businesses, get those small businesses back in the downtown. You know, they bring in the jobs. What is it, something like 70% of all the employment these days are in small businesses. You know, that's important, and to encourage the entrepreneurship. So, I know I'm preaching to the choir, so, but any questions that you may have on what we're trying to do or look at or recommendations?
So are you recommending that we continue to expand low-income housing, only we deconcentrate it? Or are we saying these other areas of priorities? I think you have the high priorities pretty accurate.
Yeah.
But it's still a little bit unclear whether you're saying we still need to do more because, it gets almost impossible to match, to address the income gaps, the 30% limit and all that, without saying we're going to expand subsidized housing or low-income housing, which I don't know where we can go with that.
What we're saying is that based on the numbers, your biggest needs are for the elderly and the disabled, and supportive housing and affordable housing for them, and not to concentrate it downtown, but to scatter it. Not only in the city, but also in the county.
Right.
And also,
And you have to work
That's
with the
important.
county and the region.
Walter, if you can clarify in your documents about affordable housing, it's not necessarily subsidized.
Yeah, affordable housing is not subsidized housing.
Okay.
They're not equal. So, there's ways to lower housing costs, et cetera, with development that you can provide down payment assistance to get a young couple started, that need that. And you're not providing a constant subsidy, those type of things.
Well, we do those sorts of things.
Right, exactly.
Promote home ownership.
Yes.
We already do those sorts of things.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're recommending is to continue doing.
Yeah, to continue
A lot of
the
things that we're
programs that
already
you're doing,
doing.
yes. And unfortunately, there's not enough money.
Does HUD require you to put a priority on management and administration?
Yes.
Because Jonathan does a fine job, but it just seems, it's work that needs to be done. And so it seems funny to give it a priority. It's no slam, you guys do a great job, but
When we say priorities, HUD used to have high, medium, and low priorities. High priority is something that you're going to be funding now for the next year or two or over the 5-year period. Low priority, you may fund it, you may not. There may be other federal funds that agencies apply for. That's why the low priorities were those two with the homeless and special needs.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Under the goals section, you have HS-4, anti-poverty. Eliminate pockets of poverty and impacted areas by deconcentrating assisted housing and services. Is that one of the federal directives of the plan that should be included, or is that something we came up with?
There's, the federal government, through HUD, has a priority, has a policy to not promote housing in areas of concentration of poverty and areas of concentration of minorities. That you no longer, develop new housing in these same areas. You try to diversify the housing throughout the community.
So
it's a federal priority.
So we pulled that from one of the HUD sort of
Yes,
guidelines.
Boilerplate language.
yes.
But I think it was also,
We also heard that.
Yes.
Throughout our interviews. We had extensive interviews, we had public meetings, and we heard this from numerous, sources.
I guess I find it odd, and I support the directive, but when we get requests, I'll use Washington Gardens as an example, or Nolan Village, to either enter those entities that are leaving the cycle of that federal subsidy program, to re-enter that 20-year cycle again, or increase the size of those pockets. We're typically asked for some type of show of support to do so. And here it seems like what we're being asked to do is completely the opposite.
That's correct.
Okay.
Previously, your 5-year plan did not have this in it, and it was too general and too broad. And now you have problems. you
How
gotta
do we
address.
engage these, the Hagerstown Housing Authority is not really the Hagerstown, it's not, although the mayor appoints the members of the board, that's about as much control as we have. We have a representative from the city council or two that go to their meetings. But especially the ones that are completely not associated with the city, how do we engage them in order to achieve some of these goals, whether it's redevelopment of their property into something more socioeconomically mixed? How do you have any suggestions or thoughts on that?
The trends nationally have been less and less, subsidized units, even the low-income housing tax credit programs, where you have less subsidized units, less affordable units, and more market rate units, and you mix them together. Large, that I think you're aware of in Pittsburgh, where we're from, the Civic Arena site that's owned by the Penguins, and they brought in McCormick Barron. It's going to be 30% affordable housing, 70% market rate housing. Great site. It's right there next to the downtown, but it's also part of the Hill District, which traditionally has been an African-American area in the city. The community has stepped forward. The councilman from that district has stepped forward and said, listen, we want to put in that area, a balance between affordable housing and fair market rate housing. And so what they did is an overlay district with their zoning. And they said, okay, this is a special development district. You can do the same thing with your downtown, your trail district, any of the other areas, and say, this is a development district. The city controls land use and land development. You can say that, and you can put that in. And these are one of the tools that communities are using now to deconcentrate and to say, we no longer want, this as a pocket right here.
Yeah.
You can also use I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, it's an aspirational thing too. I mean, if you're in poverty, if you're living in subsidized housing, and all you see around you are poor people who may be unemployed or something like that, you have nothing that really, to visualize in terms of where you can go from there. And I think that's one of the crucial elements when we talk about housing and education and jobs being, the ticket out of poverty.
And that's why HUD has changed with the Section 8 program, whereby there's the component that you can use your Section 8 voucher as down payment, so that you're not, constantly, a renter, that you can become a homeowner and use that for your mortgage payments.
And I do think there's potential for us to partner with our housing authority to achieve some of these goals, to move people from Section 8 into homeownership. I'd like to explore even incentives for how we can take, the Alexander House, for instance, on the square, and incentivize that property owner to make improvements to maybe the 4 upper floors to create market rate housing within that particular location, and then try to do that in other places. Have you ever seen any instance where, you take a whole building that was subsidized housing and it gets converted into something mixed? I mean, is that wheel already been invented?
Yes, it has.
So
It has.
there are models out there
There
for
are
that.
many models, yes.
Yeah.
Because that building, it's a beautiful, historic building in the downtown. It's an anchor to your square that you really want to be able to keep that and preserve that. And yet it's falling into disrepair in a way. It looks like a tired building, and if you can bring in more rent into that building, you can bring in,
Increase the
more-
revenue to be able
Yeah.
to reinvest in the property.
Sure,
Yeah.
exactly. And there are investors all over this country that are doing that in the downtown. The downtowns are coming alive again. People are moving downtown,
New urbanism,
Yes,
yeah.
people want to live in the downtown. They want you already have the amenities, you have that cultural
Right.
district.
Well, and I think the market we seek are the sort of the newly retired baby boomers who are empty nesters, who are looking to downsize, but they want those cultural amenities and entertainment and restaurants and things like that. And the best thing about them is they don't have kids and they don't need jobs.
The young
So,
professionals too.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, my generation and Jonathan's generation.
Okay, any other questions or comments? So the next steps, there's,
Next steps, obviously, these documents are quite substantial. They're roughly 300 pages, and we wanted to maybe have an opportunity next week, if necessary, to continue the discussion if there were any additional questions, once you can take everything in. At the same time, next week, we're also going to look more specifically at the CDBG budget with the CDBG public service funding requests and the recommendations from the Public Service Review Committee, the Citizen Committee, and then the consolidated plan, the annual action plan, and the analysis of impediments for fair housing choice would be up for mayor and council approval then on June 23rd, and then we would submit to HUD on July 1st.
And Jonathan, you really need us to adopt it on the 23rd.
Yes, it would hinder us from expending any block grant funding then after July 1 if we did not adopt something for the plans.
does anyone have any concerns at this point about what's been presented?
I'd just like to ask a question. There's a street that you're probably familiar with if you've been around Hagerstown called Locust Street. And between East Avenue and Randolph Avenue, part of it is very, very, very run down. In spite of the best efforts of some of our people in Hagerstown and some of the citizens who put more money in at least one of those places than it was worth. I want to know what we can do to get rid of that. That place is an eyesore. It's a terrible looking place. And it's a shame that it exists in the city of Hagerstown, Maryland. I've been complaining about it, Penny's been complaining about it, others have been complaining about it ever since I've been in this office for 3 years now. But I haven't seen a single improvement down there. Well, Penny plants some flowers across the street, that helps, but that doesn't help the other side of the street.
That's to save the Ohms house, that's one of the.
So what's this plan gonna do to help us get rid of that street, or to get rid of that situation on that street? I mean, we have very uncooperative landlords or homeowners who don't want to do anything with their property, and they make it very difficult for anybody else to be a part of that neighborhood and to improve anything, and they won't improve anything. So, it's very frustrating when you look at it. I pass it every day when I'm going home from my office down in the square. So what's this gonna do to allow something like that to be taken out?
Are they owner occupied houses or rental or
They're mostly rentals.
mostly rentals?
Yeah.
And your rental registry program, and your code enforcement, have they, gone into the houses and, citations, et cetera, or,
We have vacant,
Yeah,
we
yep.
have vacant, and then with code, as far as code goes, right now, we're working on vacant homes, so I have no idea where we are as far as the whole rental
And
registration.
nor do I.
Yeah.
It's such a particular eyesore, though, that you can't miss it.
But that's also something, if they're vacant or et cetera, I know that Jonathan has said that acquiring, or you've just acquired a property on Prospect Street, can you acquire property there? Those type of things, can you earmark funds for that?
But we have.
Yeah.
And one of the properties was actually just sold, along with 3 other ones. Wasn't that the grouping?
Yeah,
Because the one, honestly, was on the market for
It's on the corner of the alley.
Well, yeah, for $100,000, and it got thrown right in with the other 3 that went to Habitat. And I believe all of them were bought for
Yes.
$90,000. But that's what we're faced with. They are just, the one young couple is now finally moving. He was the one who was trying to hold on and to keep it there, but it's just not. Most of it is rentals.
It's a difficult area with the dynamic of the age of the structures, the high density of some of the structures. And I would say the plan itself wouldn't specifically address Locust Street in general, but I think it does, as Walt mentioned, it still calls out opportunities for home ownership and some of the initiatives that could help the street if we could formulate a coordinated plan, which obviously one property acquisition in that block likely isn't going to turn it around. So I think, a more comprehensive effort would be needed.
Well, we have 105,000 in the 2016 budget for residential rental rehabilitation. The problem would be getting the cooperation of the ownership wanting to use that.
And-
Through CDBG, there would be other programs, but
Seems like the best luck we've had is when we have these bank-owned properties that, they're not looking to keep these properties, and
True.
they'll sell them to us for a song, and then we can invest some money in them and get them back into the hands of homeowners.
And we just haven't gone that route. There's so many that's empty there.
Well, and there was feedback last night from the chairman of our planning commission, who was very vocal about the fact that the city shouldn't be spreading the investment out, so to speak, but that we should be concentrating more on particular blocks and units. And I get that argument, but then there's also these properties that are basically linchpins in some of these neighborhoods where the whole fate of the neighborhood depends on how this one house may go. So it's trying to meet all of those demands is the big challenge in terms of,
We met with
Keeping
some
this ball
residents
rolling.
from that area too on Locust, and they were talking about the problem, one of our early meetings. And talked about that exact problem. People who are homeowners living next door to a rental property and the problems caused by those tenants, to that property, et cetera. But that's where you really have to get after, the owner of the property.
The landlord.
You do have strong, codes.
We have strong codes, we get beat up a lot.
Yeah.
And then they get relaxed depending on who may be elected the next time as council members. And that hurts us a lot. If we cannot keep it at a steady, it really defeats us. But, I would love to see more, but as soon as you do, you have it filled, and then they have attorneys, and this is where we're at.
Are you
Locust
familiar
Street is
with
bad.
any legislation where renters get like the first right of refusal if the property that they're renting goes up for sale? I think DC implemented something like that, but
Not familiar with that, no.
sort of an effort to encourage home ownership. If people are able to afford the rent and a mortgage will be, at or below what that would
Yeah.
be, then it sort of gives people in the position of renting a house, that maybe more opportunity to take ownership of that place if it were up for
I'm
sale.
not familiar with that, but does the state have a vacant property review board and a land bank law? You know,
We do, there is a land banking, we would have land banking authority under
Okay.
state law if we wanted to go that route. So we
Yeah, I
do
mean,
have
if you-
that tool in our toolbox.
So you could, go after those properties and,
Right. If
maybe
there were
set some of
certain
your most.
targeted areas,
Yeah.
right, we could start to, it's one of those things, I think staff are pretty good at
Yes.
monitoring the market and seeing if there's any of these critical properties that end up going for sale. They've been pretty diligent about bringing us those kinds of opportunities.
Because you could, reserve some money in your budget that this was, as a pilot program and see how it works, and do that. You have, you have rehab, you have acquisition funds, et cetera, in a proposed budget. You could just say, I'm gonna take this money and reserve it to Locust, or I'm gonna reserve it to, East Franklin, or Prospect, without even changing your plan. You can just say, I want to designate this. There's other tools which are known as an NRSA, a Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy Area, where you can concentrate your CDBG funds in a neighborhood, or part of the city. And you can provide those funds for people who are upper income and lower income, as long as 51% of the total money spent there benefit the lower income. And that's also an encouragement for other people who are above income to move into that area or to develop their housing. And they figure, well, why would I invest in this neighborhood because it's not going anywhere? That gives you an opportunity to do that. So, but, think of an NRSA area too, and it's part of the strategy. I think we even put that in the plan about it's a need to even consider those other sources of and federal programs, part of the CDBG.
Well, like Jonathan said, this will be back on our agenda next week. Certainly, I think everyone also received a link to all 500 pages online of the report. So give folks some time to study up on that and bring any more questions or concerns to the table next week.
Let me just say thank you.
Thank you.
This obviously has been a lot of work.
This has been a really good experience too for us, because Jonathan and I were telling Sarah and Jonathan how the staff and the people that we've met, not only in community development, but the rest of the departments that we've met, are really interested in doing something, really interested in their jobs and interested in the community. We do a lot of this work in other communities, in Ohio and Indiana and Pennsylvania, West Virginia, North Carolina, et cetera. And we are really impressed because Hagerstown is alive, and Hagerstown, your staff and your mayor and council, really want to be involved, and that's good. I have to commend you, really.
Well, on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
We're a little behind on our agenda tonight, but I'm thinking we can probably make up some time. We have the grandstand building in Fairgrounds Park on the agenda next.
Grandstanding right now?
I'm grandstanding.
Grandstand building.
Oh,
Good evening. I just wanted to talk about two projects we're proposing at the Grandstand Building in Fairgrounds Park. Over the last few years, we've had some really good things happening there. Nick Varner's here with me, and the Police Athletic League have grown, doing some great things there. Our Parks office is there, our Parks shop is there. Amy and Junior are both here with me tonight, and our park recreation programs are growing. We realize that renovating that building to an ultimate community center is not in the cards right now. So what we're proposing is two smaller projects there that we'd like to get your consent on. The first is an electric upgrade, which I don't know that we really have a lot of choice. I wasn't just lay it out on the table like that. We found out last year that the 50-year-old plus electric service there is overloaded, basically, is the only way you can say it. So I worked with City Light. They did a terrific job of engineering a new service for us. We put it out to bid. The low bid was in the $52,000 range. Junior and I got together with the low bidder, and we negotiated it down to about $44,000. if we do some of the trenching and such. But basically what it is, it would provide a new electric service for the entire complex there that would serve POW, our shop, any future growth in that building. So we're highly recommending that we move forward with the Beacon Electric contract later this month at your voting session for a contract amount of $44,650. We'd need a little bit of extra money, maybe a few $1,000s for some of the conduit that we're going to install, because we have to trench from Cannon Avenue the whole way to the building. That's the part that we're going to do. The conduit, we would need some funds to pay for that. So that's one part of the proposal. The second part is we'd like to develop a recreation space in the upstairs of the grandstand building. For many years, it was just used for storage, and it was just kind of a random amount of things stored there. Well, when Junior had his staff go through it, they cleaned it out, and we could easily develop a room up there about the size of this room, actually, maybe a little bit bigger than this, 32 by 65, that we could use for a recreation space. That could be a space, and Amy could provide a whole list of things that she would program there, but also the Police Athletic League would like to use it some. The public could use it, we could rent it out, those kind of things.
And when you say upstairs, can you clarify what you mean? Because I'm
Yeah.
having a hard time
It
visualizing.
is confusing, you're right.
You're not talking about where the seating is, you're talking about.
No, I'm
No,
talking
it's
about
the other part.
the upper level that you would enter.
Cheerleading was, and the,
No.
didn't you go in and go up?
No, I'm talking about in the grandstand, if you go in, basically at that level, it was just used for storage.
Oh, where they had the book sales?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
Long time ago.
long time ago,
Yeah.
yes. That area has basically just been used for storage, but we feel like we can make a usable space there. The good thing is we already have parking, we already have bathrooms, it's already ADA compliant. Basically what we do is just finish out the walls, put in heating, cooling, and electric, and we think that we could have a space there that the community could use.
Isn't it concrete floor?
It's a concrete floor,
The skate
which,
park was there for a little while. a
it
long
was
time ago.
downstairs. The skate park was, well, was there one
There was one
upstairs?
before that.
Upstairs.
Okay,
Yeah, the one before the last one.
okay.
How high are the ceilings there?
They're very high. They're
Yeah.
Yeah, very.
easily higher than this.
Yeah.
So you could do some climbing wall
You
things
could,
and stuff. in
that's
there.
just
Yeah, I
an
saw that,
artist's
yeah.
rendering of what's possible. So we're asking for your permission to allow the staff to move forward with doing that. We would do that in-house with junior staff, and we would do that something probably towards the fall. The CIP is in your packet. That was in the recently approved budget. It's $125,000. It's bond financing, if you want to point that out. But certainly the electric part, I don't think we can afford not to do that. And we probably do it after all the events are over this summer, probably like October, and have it done before Thanksgiving.
With regard to the second project, are there any weight-bearing issues involved with that?
No.
I mean, with 65, with a room that large, you get a whole bunch of people in there and maybe other things.
Right. I've looked at it. We've had a local structural engineer look at it. It was originally designed for a mob of people being in there.
Okay, yeah, it was.
We don't see any issues with weight bearing.
Okay. Well, this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but with the first project, why don't you just put the bigger fuses in?
That's probably been tried.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the issues in terms of the electrical upgrade is, like when you're planning a big concert, isn't that sort of how this came up? I mean, there's enough power to power all these amps and speakers and things? Is that one of the issues?
Anything at the grandstand building would just, when the heat is on, when we're heating the PAL rooms, the staff offices, it's maxed out. So there wouldn't be any room to add anything like that.
I think in addition to what's suggested here, we should also add a ropes course as an element of the recreation and educational opportunities there. To me, it's more bang from your buck than you can ever get. Probably the most expensive part of it is the insurance. But just the kind of programming that you can do with something like that would be really powerful for the youth of Hagerstown.
I see that all the time in other
Community use
publications.
for training, for
Ropes
business.
courses, zip lines, those
Yeah,
kind of things
that's
are
one of
really,
those things that
really popular.
if you have trained staff actually make you money, or at least pay for itself.
It's something we'll have to research, and I know Nick's looked at it too, so.
Rodney, with regard to the second program, The utilization of that is going to be fairly complicated. I mean, if there are 1,000 groups, 500 groups in the community that want to use it at some point for something, then somebody's going to have to be there to make the deal, pick up the rent, hopefully, and make sure the heat's on, the lights are on and off. How do, I mean, is that responsibility going to fall on us?
Yeah, I think it would. It'd be our facility. We would schedule it like we do our other facilities, say pavilions in the parks or fields or any uses like that. We would use our active software that we have and create a facility there. And we would have a scheduling calendar for that so that we could manage that. So whether it's Amy doing a program there or Nick doing a program there, we'd have that scheduled. As far as opening and closing the building, our staff would have to do that.
Okay,
If we're
but
renting it out, that would cover that cost.
You feel like we can do it?
Yes.
Without adding additional staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rodney, about the overall condition of the grandstand, I believe we did the roof. That was a major
Yes.
item
It does have a new.
a while ago. And we've done some other things to keep it secure and keep water from getting inside and so on and so forth. Besides that, is the structure, do you foresee the need to do, I don't mean the rebuilding into a facility, but are there going to be structural requirements, expenses to keep that thing going?
It's a steel framed building, and the block that you see is basically just partition walls. It's not a masonry building that the masonry's carrying a lot of the
They're
load.
just separated.
So some of the masonry is looking, some of it is showing some of its age. So that might need some repairs done to it, but it's not load bearing. So I don't think that there's any major issues there other than cosmetic things, I guess is what I'm saying. It's a continual battle with that area that slopes down where the seats were when the wind and the water blows in there
Right.
to keep water from running down through there. We've done a lot of different things to try to mitigate that, but it does have a new roof at the top, and that'll last, for another 20, 30 years. So, Junior, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I think mostly what I see out there is mostly cosmetic issues, painting.
Okay.
It's sitting there, it ought to be used.
Right, I think it can have a higher use than what it's
A higher use,
been
sure.
used for, which is just
Storage.
storage, yeah.
So is there any objection to the plan as it's been outlined here in the memo?
No, I'm in favor of both projects.
Yeah. Okay. Any,
Yeah, it's a good project.
okay.
Okay,
You got the thumbs up.
thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for the trenching.
That's this one right here.
The chief's gonna give us an update on the excessive use of city services program.
That doesn't happen, does it? I have some updated forms I'm gonna pass out. Good evening.
Sounds like my fingers working. Good evening. There you go.
Again, thanks for having us, Mr. Mayor and council. I have with me Officer Jerry Kendall, who's in charge of our crime prevention program, and specifically this particular program, our crime-free housing program, as we call it. Jerry's responsible for sending out all the letters and having all the communication. So I've asked Jerry to come along with me. He has a couple of stories to share. I'll go over the data real quick with you, explain what you're looking at, and then we also include in your packet the first chronic nuisance housing list. That's the first publication of our annual list. That's in our ordinance. And then I also have a chart in the back about Cortland. It sort of ties in with the story, so in a couple different ways. So first of all, last April, council passed the changes to the Chapter 95 and 197 dealing with, in general, the chronic nuisance properties, the qualifying calls for service, the nuisance properties. So there were some significant changes in that, And back then, we looked at what the program would have looked like if it would have been in place in 2013, and ran some numbers past you to show where we would have had, on the left-hand side of some of those numbers. In 2013, we had around 9,000 overall calls for service for qualifying calls. It would have been qualified as a qualifying call. Now, later on, we put some validation things in place, which, if you remember, that was important in this program, that it wasn't just taken at face value. So when an officer gets a call for, let's say, a disturbance at a property, that would be one of those 9,000 calls. But the officer has to go there to that property and see if it actually qualifies is it actually a disturbance at the property, and then is it related to actions that's going on at the property, or perhaps out on the sidewalk out front and they just gave the address, so we wouldn't count that against the property owner. So if you look over on the right, from April 14 to April 15, that's 1 year's worth of data. In parentheses there, we've actually had an uptick in this. We've had about 11,000 of these calls during the past year, which I sort of suspected this because we're pushing the program hard, we're informing the public, and we're asking the public to call. The public is listening, the public is calling, and that's good for us. So this is sort of we're sort of resetting the bar here on what we're looking at as far as problem properties and chronic nuisance. So even though we went up a couple thousand, the number next to that is 716. Now that's the number that was actually validated by Jerry. So we had closer to about 1,000 calls out of that 11,000 that the officer said yes. So about 10%, or a little less than 10% of the calls, the officers are saying, yes, this is a qualifying call. That then gets screened further by Jerry, and he gets it down to 716. And from that, below that, you'll see of those, we're dealing with 457 properties, where individual properties. So some of those are repeat calls at the same property. Had this program been in place over a year ago, we would have seen 36 properties on the chronic nuisance list. We're actually experiencing 28 properties on the list. It doesn't sound like a big difference, but of those 8 that we're missing are the biggies that we were really having problems with. They're not on the list. You're going to see they're not on the list on the next page. So we would have assessed 40 fines. We've actually only assessed 7 fines this year, and I think that attributes a lot to what Jerry's doing. He's mailing a letter out every single time we go to someone's house and we qualify that call for service. Jerry mails a letter out. In the past, we only mail about a dozen letters a year. Last year, we mailed over 600 letters to landlords. Jerry's become on a first-name basis with a lot of our property owners and landlords in the community, and has really a lot of good stories to share. I've asked him to share just a couple tonight with us. And the fines, we're not at this to make money, and I know the council didn't approach it that way. But had it been in place in 2013, we would assess $36,000 in fees. We estimated that through proper management, we would not be assessing a lot of fees, and we're not. We're under $2,000 in fees that we've actually assessed under this program after mailing 600 letters. So that's a great response from landlords. We've only had a few that have had some trouble with, and the fees are working. When we hit that $500 fee, if they haven't called Jerry, they're showing up in his office. So, and saying, what do I need to do? How can I make this stop? So that, just good story after good story. So the goals of this overall program were to improve the quality of life in neighborhoods. That's the resolution that the council passed. I think we're meeting that goal. In particular, we're engaging the property owners like we've never done here before in our community, and it's been a lot of work for Jerry to manage, but he enjoys it, embraces it. He's also done some training. On the second page is the list of chronic nuisance properties. Now, in general, if a property gets 3 calls for service for disturbances, they're validated by the police officers. Again, we're only validating about 10% of them. And then from that, Jerry screens them down a little bit more to really make sure they are qualifying. So we're well below 10% of even the calls for service. They're actually getting letters and being sent out. After they get 3 on a standard property, they end up on this chronic nuisance list, and any more fines after that, or occasions after that, is when they get the fees, the 100, the 250, the 500. And we're seeing very few of those properties that are actually getting those fees. I think it's 7 was the number that we had that actually get fees assessed to them. Out of the 28 properties, we're only seeing 7 of those properties actually got a fee assessed to them. which is where you're getting that $2,000 in fees. Have I lost anybody at this point on that first page? So on the second page, you can see the list, and our ordinance states that annually we'll publish a list, so this is our first annual publication. All the addresses are on the left-hand side. It states that we have to list the property owner's name, so some of them are individual owners, some are LLCs. And then Jerry added a column over here that we thought would be of interest to the council, which is, are they in the county or out of the county? So you'll see how many are of that list.
In terms of ownership.
Ownership, yes.
Not the location of the property, but ownership.
Correct. So close to half of them are out-of-county owners, which is not surprising to the council that those are the ones we're having the issues with. And then the last page I gave you on the handout, I told you we'll tie this in with Cortland a little bit. When we talked about this ordinance, we talked about Cortland. And Cortland was having a high number of calls for service there. In 2013, they had 552 total calls for service. That's not nuisance stuff. That's nuisance, that's actual crimes, that's different things that were going on there. But since this ordinance went in place, and through some efforts Jerry's going to talk about with his working with the management, we saw over a 30% decrease in calls for service just in Cortland. And Cortland is not on our list of chronic nuisance properties. And that's tremendous effort to be done, because we really didn't think they were going to be able to keep themselves off the list, because the council, we made the policy so tight, and they met the demand, and they worked with Jerry. So, Jerry, maybe you share a story about how you're working with Cortland?
The chief and I actually went out to Cortland Apartments a couple of weeks before the ordinance actually took effect. We sat down with the existing management and kind of laid out what was going on, what we expected, and how the program was going to work. The property owner went through a few management changes. New managers came in. I went in again, sat down with them, discussed what the ordinance was, how the ordinance worked, and that really, as a police department and under Chief Holtzman's guidelines, we want to create community partnerships. So we were looking at this crime issue more as a community partnership and resolving the issues out there. I took the crime-free multi-housing program that we have, which is the other program that I run, brought that into the management. I ran the manager through the program. He embraced the program. We then took the program and trained every staff member at Cortland and some of the other additional properties that are run by the owner. They have taken the concept to heart. I am in almost daily email or phone contact with the staff at Cortland, going over all the calls for service that occur out there. And they are, as soon as there's a problem, they're having that problem removed, whether it's through eviction or what have you. So they've put policies and procedures in place. They are sticking with their background checks. They're sticking with what they need to do, and it's showing. So, I mean, that's a great success that we've had out there.
And a couple of our properties in the north end, Jerry, if you could talk about how the landlords reached out and got some property management in place.
We've had different issues. We've had landlords that would get into the landlord business thinking they could just pull up a lease offline, get a couple of tenants, throw them in their building, and sit back and collect rent. That was the case. There was many names thrown around last year. I've since contacted those landlords as their properties have come up through the calls for service. Many of them have gone through the mandatory training that was required, and they've seen the light. They understand that being a landlord is a full-time job. You can't, even if you own one property, it becomes a full-time job. And to understanding the common standards and practices that they need to be as landlords. Having good background checks on their tenants, making sure that they have a good solid lease. The requirement that the council saw fit to put into the ordinance requiring a written lease has gone a long way. The required language under the crime-free language also has gone a long way, especially when we explain to the landlords that that language is another tool in their toolbox as a landlord to help them run their properties more efficiently. I've had several property owners come up to me that were very strong naysayers of the program. Once they've sat down with me and we've gone over things and I've reviewed the ordinance and we've talked, they're now my best friends. So they're constantly contacting me for advice, information, calls for service. So properties that we would talk about owned by some of the landlords that we would expect to be on this list are not on the list because they're realizing what they need to do to be better stewards.
Sure. And Jerry's trained over 40 people, 40 managers in his, under the crime-free management program that he has for this. And two of the properties specifically that I thought for certain were going to be on this list, some of them right up on North Potomac Street, didn't make it. The landlords actually went right out and hired a property manager and told us right from the beginning, okay, the ordinance is passed, I have a property manager in place. Turned the property manager over to Jerry. Jerry put him through a class, and they haven't made the chronic nuisance list. And it's been, again, those 8 properties I talk about, when we talk about a property, we're talking about Cortland, okay? Hundreds of properties. We're talking about large apartment buildings that are not on that list. And that's where we're seeing some big gains. I'll take the couple extra thousand calls for service all across the city. That's what we do. And I think individually, there's positive stories in different neighborhoods. But when I see some of the addresses that we just figured were going to be on the list, they're not there. I think that's a testament to what Jerry's doing and what the program's basically supporting Jerry and backing Jerry up as he's working with these landlords. So I'll take any questions you have.
2 questions. The first is, of the individuals or entities on this list, are they listed because of one property, or are there some on this list that have multiple properties?
There are some on there that, if they're on this list that I gave you,
By address.
by address, the property
Okay.
address is the property address that is chronic nuisance.
So
Then,
So they may own more than one property, can have dozens of properties. This is one of their properties that fell into chronic nuisance.
Okay. So it's odd that there's really no
duplicates.
There was no duplicates.
It is.
Which would suggest that the clientele are the issue and not,
now, the ordinance did spell out that it's property owner in the ordinance, so it's the property owners. There are a few in there that are covered by the same property management company, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying.
So-
Some of these that are listed are the owners, may be using a property management company
Right.
that is listed, so it's the property management company that may not be doing their due diligence on behalf of several owners.
Well, since the program started, when we're about 14 months into the program, I would say within the next 30 to 60 days, probably a third of these properties will fall off the list as the calendar goes with the chronic nuisance, so those calls will start dropping off. The property management companies, it was kind of a learning curve for them as well. So they've, the ones that, the names that are always brought up, I don't want to throw any company under the bus, so to speak. They are become very responsive. So when we do have an issue come up, I can send them an email, or if I'm sending them a letter, they're taking care of the problem immediately. Where before they weren't, it was kind of, they were unsure of what was going on. So those things are ironing themselves out.
The second question I have is, for those larger entities, it's funny, we just talked about this concentration issue in the last discussion. What I've heard from folks that are renting out, especially I've heard from a number of folks out of Cortland, of those that have made a decision not to move, they are seeing a change in the clientele moving in. Do you see that just as there's changes in property management side of things, do you see a change in the clientele base that landlords, especially in these larger places, are taking in?
Absolutely. I was speaking with one property management company, just purchased some properties in North Prospect Street in the 600 block. They are actually not filling units because they're not finding people that are meeting their criteria. So they're
Okay.
actually more willing to keep some units vacant to find the proper level of clientele.
Hard to stereotype reality.
Correct.
And that's just a fact.
Cortland Apartments, I mean, we're talking about them. Previous management, they were doing background checks, but they didn't care what was in the backgrounds. So, we know this. That's changed, and as a result of that, you know, like you said, you're seeing a change in clientele, you're seeing a change.
I've
in
heard
the
from folks
people,
out there that say they
and they're-
completely see a change.
They want to fill
That's great.
units. I mean, there's been discussions about the expansion that they want to do out there, those sorts of
But
things.
it's in their interest to have better tenants too,
Exactly.
because they're more likely to stick around and actually pay their rent and, you
They
know.
want that better bottom line.
Yeah.
And that's,
Raise
this
the
ordinance is a
value of their
win-win-win
property.
for everybody. As a police department, we're winning. We're not going out there all the time, you know, wasting our resources. Management is getting the better bottom line, better able to fill their units, make money, which is what they're in the market for. And the tenants are getting that better quality of life, not having a police car
Yeah,
roll in front of
neighborhoods
their
are getting a
building.
better quality of life, yeah.
Jerry's crime-free program, that three-phase program that some of these larger ones are going through, the goals of that are higher occupancy and lower turnover, and it just equals a better quality of life. We saw that with the Bradford on the dual highway. We've talked about that in here. They went through the voluntary program, and they saw some good success with it. So we're hoping that transmits into some of these. That's the answer. When they say, what do I do? Jerry offers that program to them, and they've accepted it, and they're working through it. Yes, sir.
Just a technical thing, I think it would be useful for us to have the number of units in these properties, probably have that in the records, just so we can get a feel for the scope.
Yes,
You know,
sir.
just another column. But the second thing is, I know we're running short on time, but I think it would be, if you could briefly give the listeners, briefly how people got on this list and what the consequence is of being on this list.
The ordinance dictates a number of calls for service in chronic nuisance, to meet chronic nuisance. For most of these properties, it's either 3 or 4 calls that are qualified before they reach chronic nuisance. Most of these, looking at them, just about all of them are under 24 units, which would be 3 or 4 qualifying calls. So any of the ones that are assessed fees would go beyond that number. So there would be 4 or 5 calls, 6 calls, 7 calls to receive those, the fees that are assessed with the program. There's actually only one business on the list that was actually a commercial property. There are 3 different properties, I believe, that are actually owner-occupied properties that were put on the list. They have not received any fees as of yet.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Making the list is the sort of the third and final warning in most places. And once you're on the list, then after that, any additional calls that get qualified can be assessed a fee. So even though there's a lot on this list, but there's fewer than would have been a year ago, only 7 of them have actually received a fee. So,
And I lied, I have one last question. Refresh my memory a little. The list you have here and the application of this law does not apply to the temporary sheltering and rooming facilities that I was talking about earlier, right?
No, it does not.
It does not.
Not as a rooming facility.
Okay.
The ordinance does cover every property and every address, with the exceptions of the Hagerstown Housing Authority, which is spelled out within the ordinance. So if you're speaking about, say, the Reach Shelter or one of those properties,
Wells, W, Reach.
we never get the calls there. We have had the calls for Reach. The guidelines that we use is if they are calling us, asking us for assistance to deal with an issue that is not of their own making, we are not qualifying those calls.
So if an individual that they take in for sheltering purposes, that is committed there through the drug court, let's say, and they contact you and say, hey, I've got an individual, this is the issue that's occurring, we would like your assistance to address the issue, with the individual, that is not a qualifying call.
No, I will not qualify that call.
Okay.
We don't want to keep people from not calling the police.
I understand.
However,
But
if
we
that-
also don't
Right.
want to have the police responding to these places
Right.
100 times
If-
a year.
If they're causing a problem for a neighbor, then, and we get there and find out it's somebody, it's a resident of that property that was causing that issue outside, then we will qualify it against the
So-
property.
You know my position. I mean, I think that if you're living there and you're causing a disturbance, you're qualifying. That requirement for police activity, but maybe at minimum, I'd be interested to see if there is a link between the places that you have that make this list. Because when I was at the Homeless Coalition meeting, I guess, I don't know, a month ago, there was discussion that, I mean, very frankly speaking, as you leave those sheltering facilities, there are specific landlords that these entities utilize for transitional housing services. I mean, it's just, the way it works. Once you graduate out your 6 months or your 9 months, and you go into specific locations that they have, established relationships with. I'd be interested to see if there is a link between those two instances. Leaving the sheltering facility and then going into a place, you know what I mean? Because I understand you're not doing it in those places, but if it's occurring after that period of discharge and getting on this list, then I'd be interested if that link exists.
I could take a look at the list and we could see if any of them are being used as halfway houses. There could be one on there. You're interested in knowing what landlords are partnering with an association?
I think the reality is none of this is none of this is overly secretive. You know what I mean? Like we all function within sort of a generally same realm of those activities. Especially in your daily operations. It's just a reality. I'd just be interested to see, if that's occurring, you know what I mean, then it's going to be an issue that is a continually occurring issue and not an issue that's going to be resolved. And I think it speaks to your statements about the places that aren't making this list because they are setting an appropriate standard. And not just meeting that standard, but properly monitoring, that level of accountability. And I think from the outset, the entire focus of this was the accountability of community conduct.
Absolutely, and getting them active management we talked about, and we're seeing more of it.
One of the things that I'm doing with this ordinance is I do look at the notes for the calls. So, for instance, we see a pattern, we have an individual possibly with mental health issues. I do contact Turning Point or Mental Health Authority to get them to intervene. So the overall goal my goal with the program is to fix the issue, not just to put it on a chronic nuisance list and assess fees, but the underlying issue, find out what it is, and proceed from there. I'm also in constant contact with the Washington County Community Mediation Center, also getting them involved in issues. I've had issues, a rental property and a owner-occupied next door causing issues. That happens, probably I've had a half a dozen of those to get
Is
the
Dagmar
mediation.
subject to this process?
Yes, they are. I've only had, I believe, 2 letters, or had to send out 2 letters since this program began.
Thank you for your efforts. Very good work, and I appreciate the update. And keep up the good work.
Thank you. You brought this program to us, and you have absolutely done what you said it would do. And speaking for one person, from the inception of this program, after we got it going, I don't know about anybody else in this council, but I heard a boatload of complaints when we said we were gonna do it. Once you got it going, I have not received one single complaint about this program from anybody. And that's a true credit to what you've done.
Chief, you and Jerry deserve 2 thumbs up on this.
Well, thank you.
After only 14 months, this is more wildly successful than I think anybody could have imagined, and we appreciate the fact that you've made it so, and that the management of it has been so good and so competent and so steady. And we thank you for that. Obviously, we hope that as the years go by, we'll get better and better results. But I would urge you, whatever you're doing, don't stop doing any of it, okay? And you know what? This is really very positive stuff for our community. I think we ought to have an update like this at least every 6 months, maybe every 9 months, depending on what you think, and bring the community up to date, because this is important. These results at Cortland are dramatic. They're absolutely dramatic. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
You need this.
Next up is the Dynamark Monitoring Incentive Agreement.
To review this very quickly, in 2011, we issued a loan-to-grant incentive to Dynamark Monitoring tied to their investment in the city of Hagerstown on Northern Avenue with building improvements as well as creating a headquarter presence in the city and the creation of 35 jobs. We're recommending a 1-year extension of the incentive agreement. They created and even exceeded the creation of 35 jobs by the required date of 2013. However, in the retention, they fell short in 2014 by only 6 jobs, primarily due to timing issues and staff transition. This was a city, county, and state incentive agreement. The county has already approved the 1-year extension. The state is looking for both support from the city and the county to extend by 1 year. Dynamark is on track to bring the numbers from 29 up to 35 by the end of this year. With the extension, they would retain that for an additional year and then complete the obligations of the original agreement plus 1 year. We'll have a resolution in special session on June 9, as well as an amendment to the original agreement. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Any objections to the extension of the incentive?
Dynamark's a good neighbor.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Looks like you got your thumbs up.
Speaking of thumbs up,
All right.
I'd like to bring this evening a new retail and restaurant incentive program. For a little, for consideration, for a little background, the success of the pop-up shops has definitely shown some demand for retail in the city center. 2 of the barriers to more retail locating downtown are lack of business startup capital and also building conditions. We've addressed some of the building conditions concerns through some programs targeted at developers, the PET program, the First Third Grant program. And the PET program also does assist some office users of these buildings that are being renovated. However, we really haven't done anything as yet for retail stores. So building on the success of the pop-up shops and showing them some of the demand, staff proposed that we fill the void with the City Center Retail and Restaurant Incentive Program to help convince viable, sustainable merchants to locate in the city center. Some of the requirements of the program include a formal business plan. We want to make sure we're looking at sustainable businesses. The greater half of all the income comes from retail or restaurant sales. We don't want a business that's skirting around the requirements here. And a minimum of a 1-year lease in the Main Street area. The Main Street area is going to be a convenient way to to locate this program because it is the core of the core, kind of where the pop-up shops have been happening and those kinds of things. So we thought we'd start in the Main Street area. And that the business has to show a lease in that area and that they're paying market rent for the space. It's not, they're not either paying too much or too little. We also wanted an explanation of how this grant will be used. And then eventually receipts showing that the grant was used in accordance with the application will be required. Applicants must be a new business moving into the Main Street area. I think that's important to show that these people have some faith in the downtown and will come down and join us. Applicants, of course, may not include bail bonds businesses, storefront churches, hookah shops, tattoo businesses, adult bookstores, or other adult businesses, gambling businesses, or the like. Funding for this program will come from the existing economic incentive line from the fiscal year 16 budget. These basically, we're suggesting a program to spend already budgeted funds, much like we do for the Spring Sprouts, did for the Spring Sprouts program, which is a micro grant program for downtown businesses, for existing downtown businesses. So we're thinking that in 2016, there's sufficient funds to dedicate up to $12,000 through June of 2016 towards this program for downtown businesses. So if, well, actually,
We would start with the application awards after July 1, as Andrew said, using the fiscal year 16 funding. We wanted to have a note that we're very pleased that there were 2 participants in the pop-up shops that became permanent, that being Kendall Taylor Home and James and Jess House of Goods. We had a. It's one of my favorites. I've been watching it.
This is House of Cards.
We had a similar but a separate incentive grant to each of these 2 businesses using remaining fiscal year 15 funding. And each of those 2 businesses will maintain a 1-year lease in the downtown as part of that incentive agreement. And the businesses were very pleased with the support that we gave them. Staff felt that this was the best utilization of remaining fiscal year 15 funding that we had available. And it also allows us to maximize what we can do with our fiscal year 16 funding. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions about the program or discussion.
I've got several, or at least suggestions. I don't think 1 year's long enough. 1-year lease is long enough. This is taxpayers' money, and it should be protected. I'd like to see us do 18 months, although a lesser amount wouldn't pay me too much, but I think it needs to be more than a year, so if you'll consider that at least. From the time the money's handed to them now, not from the time they may be aware that they're going to get it, but from the time the money's handed to them. I don't, in your chart here, lease square feet, you're not gonna lease 0 square feet to anybody, I don't think. But it seems to me that maybe starting with 625 square feet there might not be a bad idea. That allows a little room to do some business, I don't know, hot dog stand or something.
okay.
And these grants, it looks to me like reading this over that this is probably going to be available if people do different things in their shops, improvise or something, it may be available every so often, right? I mean, I don't see any limitation here on availability.
They have to be a new business.
It has to be a new,
It has to be a
okay.
new business,
So
yeah.
that's out. Okay. And lastly, eligible use incentive. Why, did you think about advertising? I mean, some of these businesses are new business, they need to advertise, let
Sure.
people know they're downtown. Why couldn't that be a part of it?
I think that probably could be.
Certainly could be.
Yeah, under startup capital eventually, I mean, making a splash, sure,
Okay.
sure.
And I do think this is a good program. I mean, this is precious little money, but if it proves its value with these kinds of dollars, then in the future, we can certainly look at expanding the program.
Well, when we look at some of the participants at the pop-up shops, they weren't big companies looking to, they were small mom and pop kind of shops. And I
Right.
think these numbers would go a long way with them, these amounts of grants would go a long way.
No, I think it's a clever idea. Congratulations.
I'd make a couple of changes myself. One is I'm not opposed to the 12-month thing because I don't think you're gonna get a lot of startups, especially from the pop-up ventures, that may jump into more than something than 12 months out of the gate. So I'm fine with that. I would, however, since it is public money, I think the premise of everything we've sort of done with those investment funds so far have been investing in the property and not the people. And so for me, I don't want it spent on things that aren't investing in the actual property itself, because clearly the issue that a lot of the small businesses are encountering is getting the space usable, getting the space, workable and functional and ready, and, everything from electric to plumbing to heating and cooling to ceiling and floor space. So for me, if that business doesn't make it to 12 months, I'd be much happier to say $3,000 of the public's money was spent in fixing the place up so that the next business can make it, than $3,000 was spent on a non-tangible result, for that economic investment. And the last thing I would do is I would get rid of the chart altogether and do it much more similar to how you're doing the first third grants for the medium and the larger, the 50 and the 250. 1,000 square feet is a pretty big space in any one building downtown for like a first floor type retail space. And $1,000 isn't going to do much for a lot of these places that are going to be in these less than 1,000 square foot places. I would much prefer if you came in here and said, hey, we're going to have $12,000 and we're going to do up to $3,000 or up to $4,000 and get 3 of them going for the $4,000, than to try and pigeonhole each of these retailers that might want to use a space into finding a space that fits these square footage requirements. If somebody comes in and says, hey, I got a space that's 1,200 square feet, and it takes $4,000 instead of $2,000 to make it, I'd rather put the $4,000 forward, because I just don't think that $1,000 is going to be enough to make some of them move off center.
So do you want to, are you saying, I tend to agree with the idea of the more flexibility, the better. And so that, would that be part of the application process, I guess?
Yeah, I'd like to just set a max and say, we're gonna have $12,000 or whatever amount you have here, 12 or 16 set aside, and say, any entity's gonna get a max of $3,000 or $4,000.
Was there any rationale to the using the square footage?
Only because of how much of an investment that they're making in coming downtown, basically.
But every building has its own issues. In other words, a building may be 800 square feet, but it may have $3,000 worth of electrical needs in order for that business to go in there, and I want to be able to cater more to the things that need fixed in the building than the space that retailer is going to occupy. And the only
So
other.
would you propose then limiting whatever the startup capital portion of the grant to like 25% or eliminate it altogether?
No, I think this amount is small enough that you limit it to a max amount. You only got $12,000 or $15,000 available, so you say, if I can get 3 retailers downtown and each of them need $3,000 or $4,000 to do it, I'd be completely fine to get those 3 or 4 retailers downtown than to wait for the period for one of them to fit within a chart like this. Much like we did the 50,000 and the 250. We didn't set square footage, we just said, hey, here's some investment expectation. But these retailers are gonna be small enough that, the funding's small enough, you're not dealing with a $50,000, gamble, so to speak. That's why I like that it's invested in the building space and not the business.
Right.
Because that building space needs outfitted and, if that business doesn't last, at least you fix the electrical, for that economic development effort. At least you've addressed the plumbing issue. At least you've address lighting issues, accessibility or window, whatever the case may be. The only other caveat is, I did hear during, at least the last couple of pop-up shop events, that I want to make sure that it doesn't limit it to one individual, because in the space we were in, there were probably 4 individuals that have similar business-type activities of wares, so to speak, that they were selling, that there was clearly an interest for a number of them to want to go together in some type of cooperative space in a retail space downtown, and I wouldn't want this to limit that opportunity. If 3 of them come in and say, hey, here's the venture that we're going to do, and it's going to be these 3 together.
I mean, I'm in favor of, I don't care what it's called, that I'm in favor of giving staff the maximum amount of flexibility to, have parameters in terms of, have a business plan, making sure there's accountability and those kinds of things. But I'd rather give staff more flexibility in terms of determining what level of incentive and yeah, I mean, that's just where I'm coming from. Mr. Brubeck.
Well, my question had been, is this really going to be enough, this layout or others, to be an incentive? Is it really going to help enough to make a difference? Where Kristen was going, I could see that, but I think to give staff just, you need to have some guideline, I think, because, there's a lot of financial need, and the first guy in is going to say, well, I need $12,000, and how are they going to say, well, we're only going to give you 2, or we're only without any guidelines? So I would say, have a cap of 3,000 or 4,000 or something like that.
I agree there should be guidelines.
There should be a
And
cap.
I think, is
Or
reasonable.
else-
But in terms of providing flexibility.
Yeah, and that's what I thought I heard you
Yeah.
say, have a cap, rather than total flexibility. It's not that I don't trust staff, I just don't think it's fair to lay it on them.
No, I hear what you're saying. I'm not
to make
saying
that
no
distinction
parameters.
between
I just think
applicants.
giving them flexibility, but I like the idea of
What do you
not
think? I don't
limiting
know.
the square
Yeah.
feet, but having maybe a max per grant, I think makes a lot of sense.
We can certainly
too.
develop a set of guidelines or a measure by which we would.
And I don't even mind if
look
you
at
say it's
proposals.
50/50. In other words, the cap's $3,000 for any one, interested applicant, but they've got to match the $3,000 with $3,000. I don't mind that being a parameter.
Well, we have some time, I think, because we'd like to come back and pass this by resolution to get it solidified. So we've got some time to retool it and can bring it back to this body before the end of the month.
Would you like to see it again in another work session with
Sure.
the modifications?
Yeah.
Some more
And
thinking on
and
it.
I presume you've talked to some potential applicants about
Absolutely.
it, but bounce it off them again.
Yeah.
But I agree with Christian, if we had, 3 or 4 solid candidates that we really helped, as opposed to, well, we can't give you more because you're only 1,900 square feet or something like that. Give
I
us a
don't-
little more, but at the same time, I don't want to just say no holds barred either.
Right.
I'd also like for one of the caveats of these guidelines to be that it goes in a building that is current. In other words,
Yeah.
if you got a building owner who's,
In good standing with this.
yeah, I mean, got $2,000 water bill behind, or, they've got code violations, yeah, I'd
That's
feel pretty
important,
crappy
right.
giving the public.
That we know that the code and utility,
Are in
any
good
issues like
standing.
that are in good standing.
Yep.
Code
Write that
too.
down.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank
for-
you.
Just one other thing. There are existing programs, pop-up shops that have come downtown. Clearly, if they were coming here in the future, they might be eligible for this grant, these grants. And I just, if you're going to make huge grants out of them, that's just a little unfair to those people who took those chances last year. So I think you just have to be maybe flexible, but sympathetic to
That's true.
others too.
And once they're here, they can take advantage of programs like the revolving loan program and the Spring Sprout Grant program and those kinds of things.
This thing really has some potential for future, when we can afford to really afford it.
All right.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we will have city administrator comments.
I would just like to thank the staff and the volunteers who worked so hard on the Blues Fest this weekend. I think it was another great event for us, so thank you very much.
Indeed. We'll do council comments. Mr. Metzner.
Not much to say more than what Bruce just said. It was a wonderful event, wonderful weekend.
I agree. Ms. Nye.
I just have a question, and that would be Thursday night when I was down at the Barbara Ingram freshman thing. There was also something going on over at the Bridge of Life Church. And then I believe we had something going on up at the College Plaza. Did we not?
The Blues.
Okay, what I'd like to know, because I have inquired about this, is that I had one individual on a skateboard that just about ran me down twice, up and down. I also had an individual that's on a bike. Now, can somebody please tell me, what are the ground rules now? From what I'm being told is that it wasn't supposed to be, but then they've taken some of the stiffness back, and now you can have skateboards and bikes on the sidewalk. When you have activities going on down here in this city, there is no need for those bicycles or skateboards to be on these sidewalks. So what is it? I don't know.
Well, they are allowed. This council is the one that relaxed the bicycling and skateboarding, but it was also, there was a big caveat in there about reasonableness, you know,
Well-
in terms of how those are being operated on the sidewalks.
I'm just saying that with knowing what we have that is in the downtown area, and the more that we are promoting having all kinds of entertainment down here, I just don't see this being a function that needs to be happening. And when we have bike lanes in the downtown, do we not, Lou?
Not on Washington, not Potomac, not in the downtown.
So you're gonna
no.
keep, so everybody's gonna, whoever wants to willy-nilly do whatever they need to do. I mean, it was just not acceptable. And that was 3 functions that were going on. So either we need to rethink this, because it isn't good. It really isn't. And I'm telling you, whizzing by is not like a child going on okay?
Sure.
I'm talking moving. That's the thing. You might as well be in Ocean City on the boardwalk and then get hit by a bicycle.
When I think if there happened to be an officer there, they could have
I
told
believe
that
that
person.
all the officers were probably up at where the university was having the thing with the Blues. There was not auxiliary, there was not
And
police.
that's the main problem.
And then I was
Right.
told by the police, it is because it had been relaxed, okay?
But there's still provisions in there for
Well, I think that
keeping it under
somebody-
control and not
look,
threatening
with
the
what
safety
we-
of
Well,
others.
yeah, look at
Yeah.
that provision and talk to the chief
With
about
what we have
it.
had, because I went to a captain
enforcement.
and I had talked and and I said, okay, I'm going to bring it forward because he's the one who said, look, it's been relaxed, okay? I said, well, my big concern too is that when promoting the auxiliary, we had nothing. There was nothing. And this was 3 events. And again, I don't know that the police department too is getting what is happening in the downtown area. They're looking only solely at one event. And there was more than one. And you're talking a large number of people. But it
Definitely look into it.
it was pretty much, okay, if I'd have had a baseball bat, I'd have been more than willing to take care of them.
All right.
I mean, it's, the streets, the sidewalks are just not made for this. So I must have slept through that one when I said relax them.
Mr. Brubaker.
Yes, I hope there were a lot of wild, enthusiastic postal workers at the Blues Fest, because
I talked to them on Friday. We had a convention of postal workers. I really tried to push the Blues Fest, so I hope they showed up. I don't know if they were going. I told them, come and live in Hagerstown. It's a great place and all that. So, but the Blues Fest I pushed hard. I figured that was a good crowd for that.
Well, thanks for going to the
Yeah,
postal
well,
workers.
anyhow, it's just-
Is that it?
That's-
Mr. Alshire?
Just one comment. We received the application rankings for the Appalachian Regional Commission. If you recall, we submitted our project, which was the downtown student housing. And I think that the ARC funding, as I've sort of grown to understand it, is primarily focused on economic investment, economic development within the community. So I found it interesting that we're ranked number 3, and the project that is ranked above that is the Day Reporting Center.
Yeah, that's right.
And, we sat here tonight and talked a good bit about a collection center of subsidized services and the impact it has on the community, and, the need for greater economic investment in our urban core. And I certainly don't want to offend anybody, but to see that, we rank the Day Reporting Center for incarcerated services above student housing for university expansion, it just makes me think that we're sort of our own worst enemies at times in our decision-making process, and I was not excited to see that ranking system.
You want to just clarify who made the ranking, though? What you said?
Washington County.
Washington County, the
Yeah,
county
not-
commissioners. made
Yeah, it's
the-
not a city ranking. Yeah.
County commissioners.
All right. Mr. Munson?
Before I get started, Penny, if you want to borrow my skateboard to retaliate, I'll lend it.
I don't want one. Thanks.
I'd like to reflect Bruce's comments about the events of the weekend, the Blues Fest. It was incredible. Almost the whole city government was engaged in making it incredible. I went Friday night, all evening and all day Sunday at the park. And at the park, I saw Eric Dykey there all day. I saw Junior Mason and his people there all day. They were very dedicated. Several police officers there all day. The whole city was working very hard to help make that event a success. And I'm sure it was a huge success. So there were a lot of people at the park. My other comment is, while at the park, listening to what people were having to say, one of the people who was most vociferous with me came to talk to me about how good things have been in the neighborhood surrounding the sheet store since the sheet store closed. This man who lives very close to where it used to be went on and went on about how much the area around there has improved. Not the first time I've heard some of that.
And we're still trying to work with Sheets on getting that property. We haven't heard anything
And
back
that's my
yet.
point, Mayor. I'm just wondering if we could do something to try to speed that project along. This man talked about putting a park there, and I know Penny's talked about putting a park there. The whole council's talked about putting a park there, as well as yourself. And it would be nice if we could figure
We'll call
out
it
some
Sheets
way
Park
to
if they'll give us the land.
try to speed that process up somehow.
I'll definitely look.
That'd
into
really
it.
be good for the neighborhood
I
and
know,
for the entire
before
city.
John left, he kept that on his sort of tickler list of things to keep following up on, so we'll make another concerted effort.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Absolutely. I will reiterate the thanks and cheers for the successful Blues Fest event. I was there Thursday night, there was a great crowd. Friday night, there was a great crowd. Saturday, it was a great crowd. I didn't make it out Sunday, but I hear that things went well. And again, Public Works, Parks and Rec, the Police Department, everybody really had a hand, especially Karen Giffen, Community Affairs, in putting that all together. So I want to congratulate them.
It was a busy weekend. I attended a grand opening for the ballroom at the Grand Building, which was very nice. Mike Fitzgerald and Ashley Haywood partnering up to keep that space running and to program it and get some events planned in there. Also attended the neighborhood's first Medal of Honor R.W. Johnson Community Center and Jonathan Street Community Memorial Day, honoring our veterans event that they had. It was a very nice way of honoring all the veterans from that neighborhood. It's a really special thing that they do there, so I wanted to congratulate them on their event. Some things coming up this Friday is the next wind down. So this Friday, they're celebrating the Maryland Theater's 100th anniversary at the wind down, so that should be a good bit of fun. Saturday, the splash pad at the Potterfield Pool is being unveiled. It's 12:30 p.m. We'll be having a grand opening for the splash pad at Potterfield Pool. So bring your bathing suit. Councilmember Brubaker, I see you putting that on your calendar. We'll expect you to be running through that splash pad with all the kids. And also on Sunday night is the municipal band opening at 7:30 at City Park, opening their 101st season under the direction of Lynn LaRue. Not his 101st season, but you know what I mean. And just wanted to mention, too, that Valerie Means, our new city administrator, was in town this past weekend. She got a taste of the Blues Fest, and I took her around City Hall and showed her where her office will be and all that good stuff. And I know she's excited to be getting started, and we'll be settling on her house, I think, next week, and we'll be ready to hit the ground running the following week. So looking forward to that. And Bruce is here. This is his second to the last meeting. I can't imagine what kind of excitement he must feel about that prospect of life after sitting around this table. So anyway, I just want to thank everybody for the good work they're doing, and if no one has anything else, we will be adjourned. Thank you.